delay. We had a very important education committee hearing earlier today, and this council respects the time that people come down to add their voice to these issues, and out of respect to all the folks for this morning, we were delayed, but we are going to get started, and we're going to play catch up really, really quick. I will call to order the Committee on Public Health and Human Services and the Committee on Licenses and Inspections. Will the clerk read the title of the bill?
Resolution number 160988, resolution authorizing the Committee on Licenses and Inspection and the Committee of Public Health and Human Services to conduct hearings concerning the impact of eviction and substandard housing on the health and well-being of low-income renters and examining solutions that would improve the safety and stability of rental housing, including the right to counsel.
Thank you. As the chair, I will recognize that we have established quorum. To my right is Councilman Jones, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, Councilman Alfred Tollenberger. I know he was here. To my left, oh, there he goes. To my left, Councilwoman Gim. To her left, Councilman Domb and Councilman Derek Green. Sitting in their chairs is Councilman Greenlee, who is a member of the committee. And I know Councilwoman Bass, who's Chair of Public Health and Human Services, was here, so she might be coming back for this. And so this is a very important topic. I'm going to pass it on to the resolution's prime sponsor for opening remarks, and then we will proceed. Councilwoman Gim.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for being here. This hearing comes out of years of work and is along the trajectory of the years of work from so many people across Philadelphia, many of whom are in this room today. And I just want to give a special thanks to our testifiers who have themselves faced eviction and will speak out courageously later in this hearing. I in particular want to give thanks to Councilwoman and the Chair, Quiñones-Sánchez, for partnering with us on this important hearing, and especially for your work on improving enforcement of code and housing policies in the city. I also want to thank our co-chairs, Councilwoman Cindy Bass, for leading on efforts to improve the health and well-being of children and families, and to recognize Councilman Greenlee's work on behalf of renters and against housing discrimination. This is a city council that is trying to take these issues very seriously. In many ways, a lot of the work that we're trying to do is not only to talk about poverty, but to unpack the ways in which poverty impacts and is lived in this city. And one of the ways has got to do with the situation of eviction. We are living in a Philadelphia eviction crisis that targets the poorest residents of the nation's poorest large city. Last year, 24,000 families faced eviction, and that is just the ones that we knew about and had legal filings. All in all, 1 in 14 Philly renters will face eviction in this city. And low-income Philadelphians, single mothers, African Americans, and those living with disabilities are the hardest hit. This is a crisis that deepens poverty and spreads homelessness. And it is an issue that cuts across so many of our constituencies. So if we care about our veterans and our seniors, we should be paying attention to eviction. If we care about our disabled communities, then we should be paying attention to eviction. If we care about women, Black women in particular, we have to care about evictions and pay attention to it. If we care about children and their academic stability and performance levels, then we should be paying attention to eviction. Eviction and the substandard housing conditions faced by tens of thousands in our city is a public health crisis. It is a responsibility of our city and our communities to rise to this challenge of ensuring that the basic dignity and human right to housing isn't going to be based on the whims of a ruthless capital market that exploits our city's most vulnerable. We have to do better. And 9 years ago, Philadelphia came together to address the mortgage foreclosure crisis. Government, the courts, and stakeholders all rose to the occasion and put in place what is now considered a national model, a foreclosure diversion program, and our Save Your Homes hotline. We have to take the same public policy approach with evictions. This isn't just a situation to be worked out between two individuals. I look forward to hearing from all of our testifiers as we dig deep into what eviction and substandard housing means for our city. And I'm really honored that our legal, medical, and advocacy communities have joined together to take on this situation with your solutions, with your vision, and with your humanity and dignity of our communities first and foremost. I'm grateful to our administration for coming together to work with council on new solutions for the crisis, and especially to our city agencies, our Health and Human Services, Licenses and Inspection, Human Relations, Planning and Development, and the Fair Housing Committee. And this story, of course, could never be told without the powerful and compassionate reporting that has shed light on the Philadelphia eviction crisis and shown all of us ways that the deck is stacked against renters and what we can do about it. But most importantly, I want to thank all the people in this room, the constituents we have here today, who have taken precious time out of their day to share your stories and experiences about eviction and substandard housing. All good public policy starts with you. It starts with us listening to and learning from you, those who are most impacted. And I am deeply humbled and honored with your courage and conviction as you fight to solve this issue in our city. And we are, all of us on council, are here and committed to fighting alongside of you. Thank you.
Thank you to our prime sponsor. And we're going to invite our first panel, William Church, Garel Martin, and Jasmine Vasquez. And before that, I'm going to recognize Councilman Jones, who had some added remarks before we get started.
My first comment is to thank the sponsors of this resolution and co-chairs of this committee for bringing this to the forefront. Today, I just wanted to mark for the record that I have the privilege of being here as a city councilman in the 4th District, but also as a dual responsibility of being on the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And these issues are very important. It stems, right as the Councilwoman said, from the mortgage foreclosure crisis that turned homeowners into renters, and now this crisis, which are turning renters into the homeless. And so we need to capture this for the record, but as importantly, set up an agenda to address this issue. So again, thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you. Councilman Green for remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Council, again, thank you for your advocacy on this issue. I'll be very brief. I do have to attend another appointment, but I will be back down for this hearing. And I think one of the important aspects of this resolution, this conversation, is that for many years, especially with those in the legal community, we've been talking about a need for a civil Gideon type of perspective. This resolution continues that conversation. We have a legal right for people in the criminal space, but in the civil side of things, we do not. And I think this resolution, today's hearings, continues that conversation and moving us forward to ultimately when we will have some type of civil Gideon within the United States.
Thank you, Councilman Green. It goes without saying that our, what I call our social justice legal community in the city of Philadelphia is not only very talented, but very committed. And I think if council has been proactive, we've done so because we understand that partnership. We value our home ownership rate in the city of Philadelphia, but we've recognized the need for adequate, affordable housing in the city of Philadelphia. And we want to make sure that we incentivize the good actors and that we call out those bad ones and establish the policies and regulations to ensure that people have a safe, healthy home environment. So I want to thank all of you. And with that, there was Jasmine. Where's Jasmine? She should join the panel. Oh, siéntate acá. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's instinct. I go right to Spanish. Right? Benefits of being bilingual here. Okay. So we'll start with either one of our panels. Thank you again for coming here this morning.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and City Council members. My name is Kateria McCabe. I'm an attorney at Senior Law Center. I direct the Veterans Kinship Care and Tenants' Rights projects. I'm here in support of Mr. Church, who will tell his story.
Members of City Council, good afternoon. My name is William Church. I'm a 65-year-old Marine Corps veteran. I suffer from extreme anxiety and coupled with COPD. As you can see, I need an oxygen tank to help me breathe. Unfortunately, I'm being evicted from my home. I have lived in my current apartment since May of 2014. While there, I have dealt with several issues regarding habitability. I have swept snow and ice in my bedroom, lived with bugs, and had squirrels in the ceiling. I endured leaks where water rushed onto my bed and other belongings, ruining my property. Excuse me. The landlord made an inadequate repair initially, but finally repaired the ceiling after weeks of complaints. Recently, a sewage pipe broke in my basement, causing 4 inches of raw sewage to accumulate. I have to live with the stench and the germs from the sewage. The conditions have impacted my breathing and my anxiety. I contacted the landlord numerous times about the pipe, but with no results. My landlords, I have refused to pay rent since I'm living in such poor conditions. I contacted License and Inspection and am waiting for an inspection of my home. I would prefer to remain in my home because I like my neighborhood. It is close to my church. I have friends in the area, and it is close to the VA hospital. That's where I receive medical treatment. I have been hospitalized 3 times in the last few months. My living conditions are impacting my anxiety and breathing. If I must relocate due to the poor living conditions, it would be very difficult for me. I am on a fixed income, and I've had trouble finding decent, affordable housing. As bad as the conditions are right now, I have nowhere else to go. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dear members of the Philadelphia City Council, thank you for holding these hearings. I would like to start by telling you that for low-income people, it is really hard to get a place to live in the city. It is harder still to get a place that is truly livable.
Jasmine, I'm sorry, for the record, can you say your name?
Yasmin Vasquez.
Thank you.
It is harder to still get a place that is truly livable. You feel really restricted in your choices, and like you have to settle for what is there, because that is all you can afford. Most of us don't know our rights or don't know what landlords are supposed to do. This is not something you learn in the streets. The laws are not told to you by your landlord. It all puts you in a situation where you don't know what is going on or how to help yourself. That is what happened to me. When I first moved into my apartment, my landlord showed me it at 11 at night. There were not many lights on, and I could not see any signs of damages. And my landlord knew I was desperate and told me everything was fine. The next day, I started moving in stuff, and I started noticing little things, and he said they would be fixed, that he was on it. But it was not just little things. There was a lot wrong with the apartment. Right when my mother and I moved in, there was a snowstorm, and I noticed the heaters weren't working. I told the landlord, and instead of fixing it, he came to the apartment with a single space heater that did not do the job. And because it was so cold, we slept in the same room, in the same bed. People shouldn't have to live like that. Eventually, I bought more space heaters myself. At the time, I also had the responsibility of caring for my newborn nephew. But because it was so cold in the apartment, I had to drop him off with family members at night so he could have a safe and warm place to sleep. He cried every time I left him. It took a toll on me because I was supposed to be the person to care for him. I will call to check up on him, but it was not enough. It still bothers me to this day. And the heat wasn't the only problem. There were rodents everywhere, eating my food, my furniture, and my clothes, making nests in my shoes. I couldn't even buy groceries because they would eat it. And then I realized the basement was flooded with raw sewage. The smell was horrible, and it was embarrassing. It meant I couldn't have family or friends over. Living like that makes you feel alone and secluded, and it makes me feel really depressed. I asked for the landlord and property manager to make my property livable, but they never really did. Then something good happened. I happened to find a number for the Tenant Union Representative Network on the internet, and they told me to come in. I went to a class there, which helped me understand my rights and what to do next. Even that wasn't enough. Even that wasn't easy, though. I told my property manager I was going there, and by the time I was back, he was at my house waiting for me. From there, he started harassing me and even tried to change my locks. And then even after I moved out, staying with a family member, they still filed an eviction lawsuit against me. I was lucky to get a lawyer for the eviction case. I went to landlord-tenant court, and once the property manager realized I had a lawyer, he said he had a family emergency and withdrew the case and walked out. He never refiled it. If I could give you a message, it is this. It is really important for people to have legal representation, so they are not taken advantage of by certain landlords doing things to tenants who can't defend themselves. Before I found out I had rights, I did not know what to do. Now I know a little bit, so that I won't go through that again and can help educate others about their rights. People need to understand the laws, and people need to be given real help. We all need help. We all need to help people who can't stand up for themselves.
Thank you again.
You can stay for now if you have questions.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Jarrell Martin. Thank you, City Council members, for inviting me here to share my story as a low-income tenant in Philadelphia. As I share my experience, I ask you to remember that I'm here representing thousands of Philadelphians who are living a similar story as we speak. I am a wife, a mother of 6 beautiful children, and an employee who grabs overtime shifts just to provide for my family. But today, I'm here as a tenant. I moved into my house in October 2013, excited to create a home where I could raise my children to be happy and healthy. I have saved my money to provide the first month, last month, and security deposit. However, shortly after moving in, I realized that I did not get what I had bargained for. The cold was settling in, but when I went to turn the heat on, nothing happened. My numerous calls and pleading to my landlord went unanswered. I had to sleep with my children all bundled up, all in one room around a space heater, constantly anxious that one would wake up cold or that the space heater would malfunction. I was so relieved when the weather turned, but by this point, there were so many other problems. My ceiling was leaking, my roof had a hole, my windows wouldn't open or close properly, and the electrical sockets were uncovered and sparked. The list goes on and on. My landlord continued to ignore my pleas to make repairs. The only time I saw him was when he demanded rent. Although we weren't technically homeless, I felt homeless. My family couldn't live safely in a home that I had worked hard to pay for. During our time in this house, I gave birth to 2 very premature babies. My son was diagnosed with cerebral palsy and receives 16 hours of skilled nursing care per day. In addition to my concerns about my son's health, the poor housing conditions added to a new worry. Would my son's nurses, as mandated reporters, see the condition of our home, feel the lack of heat, and call DHS? I had to send my children to stay with others because I was so worried that my landlord's neglect would cost me my children. I felt anxious and hopeless, but I knew that I had to do something. I discovered 311 and immediately called for an L&I inspection. I finally felt like I was moving in the right direction. Since I moved in over 3 years ago, Illinois has issued 5 different sets of violations. My home was declared a hazard and unfit for human occupancy. However, nothing happened. Nothing was enforced. Nothing was fixed. Those violations, as serious as they were, became meaningless as I continued to feel pressured to pay my rent in full. I was so afraid of winding up on the streets with my children, and I didn't know what more I could do. I wanted to fight, but I felt helpless. I didn't know my options, I didn't know my rights, or where to turn for help. I happened to be lucky enough to connect with lawyers who works with the medical legal partnerships at my son's pediatrician office. I had no idea that getting a lawyer was even an option, let alone a free one. When someone thinks of getting a lawyer, they think of all the money that it will cost. I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and paying for a lawyer was just out of the question. However, having my pro bono lawyer changed everything. Together, we stood up for me and my kids and demanded that things change. However, within weeks of asserting my rights, my landlord filed an eviction paperwork. I did what I was supposed to do, but my landlord chose to kick me and my family out of our home because I stood up. Illinois, the courts allowed this to happen. My landlord, who had never given me a certificate of rental suitability, who had gotten a renter's license only days before filing the eviction, and who had numerous outstanding Illinois violations, was suddenly in the power seat. It took 4 months of missed work, stress, and lots of uncertainty, but my lawyer was able to get my case thrown out. I often wonder what would have happened if I didn't get a lawyer. I don't think I would have fought. How do I fight without any information? Having my lawyers feels like having a security blanket. I went from sheer panic to ease. I no longer felt helpless. 3 years after the first Illinois violation, my tears, my numerous court hearings, my heat is on, but many of my house repairs still need to be made. People often ask me, why didn't I leave? It's not that simple. Where would we go? I don't have a big support system, and I can't afford the costs of moving. But at the end of the day, I shouldn't have to leave because my landlord neglected her responsibilities. I shouldn't have to leave because Illinois didn't pursue the violations against my landlord. I shouldn't have to leave because I chose to assert my rights. If I leave, another family will just move in and nothing will change. People get evicted. People get evicted every day in my neighborhood. It seems as a fact of life. You just get up and you keep going. But we're here today because no kid should have to grow up without heat in the winter or the water pouring through their living room when it rains. I'm here because my kids deserve better. Our city deserves better. Please help us in the cycle of substandard housing and unfair evictions in Philadelphia.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming and being so strong and powerful voices for this. I'm going to recognize Councilwoman Gim and then Councilman Domb.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to each one of you for coming forward and telling your stories. I mean, obviously, Ms. Martin, your story has tremendous impact by being out there in a very public way, and your courage in doing this and taking this on, and just reminding us that if you didn't stand up, that somebody else would have simply replaced what would be an unacceptable cycle of what you're going through. My question actually to each of the three of you, though I think I didn't hear it so much from Mr. Church, but I wanted to know how you heard about how to get an attorney, because I think this is one of the questions that we're trying to understand. I am assuming I heard a little bit from Jasmine and Ms. Martin about how you heard, but would be happy to hear a more direct kind of connection. But if Mr. Church could start off, because that was the one part I didn't hear from you.
I went to the Perimeter Veterans Outreach,
Okay.
and they referred me to the tenant landlord, and I went there, and got affiliated with the senior law department. Rebecca, that works, lieutenant, was so excellent in her performance that I was assigned an attorney, Ms. McCabe. That's how I came about that. And the VA has facilities if in fact I have to move. They have a truck and they would supply some of the vets that associate there to help me. But that's not really the case. The case is I have so much stuff, it would take at least a couple of months to pack everything up and get something arranged, some other kind of housing. And I would just as soon have the repairs made and stay where I'm at.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know if you had
Ms.
anything other
Martin?
to add.
You said you called. How did you get in touch with your legal?
My son has CP, so they offer at the special needs clinic legal aid for the disabled. That's how.
But was it coincidental? I mean, it's because it's the medical partnership program
Yes,
that you were part of?
It was just coincidental that that is offered because it's not, offered to just anyone.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Jasmine?
Oh, hi. I believe it was, it's not the tenants court, I think the housing committee.
Fair
I was
housing?
Fair housing, there you go. Sorry, it was fair housing. I was there speaking to somebody and they actually referred me to my lawyer. I was very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to recognize Councilman Domb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for being here today. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I would be remiss if I didn't say this. My colleagues know what I'm going to say. But I'm looking specifically at you, Ms. Martin. You have 6 children, I think, right? I just want to make sure that you and everyone in the audience knows about the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC. Let me tell you why I say this. Last year in Philadelphia, we left $100 million that could have gone to 40,000 Philadelphians who qualify. Those people earning $7.25 to $23 an hour, those people with 1, 2, and 3 children, as an example, single parent, 44,000 of income or less, at least 2 children, you'll get a check of $6,000 from the federal government, and you can file back 3 more years. Most people don't know about it. Earned Income Tax Credit. 40,000 Philadelphians qualified last year, did not get the checks. I know that's not directly tied to this, but it's our job to make sure federal money comes into the hands of Philadelphians. So for those of you who don't know about it, the Department of Revenue does a great job in helping. Campaign for Working Families and United Way, many other organizations. We'd be happy to help you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you to our panel. I am going to invite the next panel to come in. We encourage you to stay around and listen to. Our next panel is members of the administration, Eva Gladstein, who's Deputy Managing Director of Health and Human Services, Rebecca Swanson from the Department of Licensing and Inspection, Ann Fadula from the Office of Planning and Development, and Rue Landau from the Human Relations Commission, our social justice lawyer guru, all things Rue. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Greeley? For the next one? Okay. You're gonna have to shout out to me from.
Climb out of my seat.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Quiñones-Sánchez and Councilwoman Gimm and other members of council. I'm pleased to be here today to testify with respect to this resolution. Our office, I'm Deputy Managing Director for Health and Human Services, and our office oversees city agencies working with vulnerable individuals and families. These include behavioral health and intellectual disability services, community empowerment and opportunity, homeless services, human services, and public health. These agencies work together to ensure vulnerable individuals and families are healthy, safe, and supported. My testimony today will largely focus on the work of the Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity and Homeless Services. But I wanted to start by saying we have found that the need for safe, standard, and affordable housing is common to the customers of all 5 agencies, and all of us are working to address this need. Over the last year, we've been developing Together We Thrive, an agenda for health and well-being among the 5 agencies, and housing supports are an important element of that agenda. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip a little data, which will probably be repeated by other folks testifying today about the need. I'm going to briefly mention some areas of work across our cabinet, and then I'll speak more specifically about CEO and homeless services. We're proud to host a Stoneley Fellow at DHS, Nan Filer, who's here today, who's working on the nexus between housing issues and child welfare, with the goal of reducing housing as a factor for child placement, speeding up reunification, and ensuring that children do not age out of the system without a housing plan. The Department of Public Health is increasing its investments in healthy homes, including implementation of the Lead-Free Kids Plan in concert with L&I and the Law Department. The Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services makes major investments annually in outreach to chronically street homeless individuals, rent subsidies to help people gain greater housing stability, and the development of future affordable housing units for individuals with behavioral health needs. And finally, we're pleased that we were able to recently hire Director of Domestic Violence Strategies, who is, among other things, helping us better understand the connection between domestic violence and housing instability. Since 2013, CEO has served as the backbone organization for Shared Prosperity Philadelphia, the city's anti-poverty plan. Shared Prosperity unites organizations to work together on 5 goals, one of which is to increase housing security and affordability. Approximately 2/3 of the respondents to a recent survey sponsored by CEO, which was conducted in targeted zip codes with high rates of poverty, reported difficulty finding safe and affordable housing, and almost half, 48%, said that they experienced homelessness or had to move more than twice in the past year. A working group composed of participants from city agencies, nonprofit organizations, legal services, the Federal Reserve, and others have been convening for the last 3 years to study this issue. The mission of the working group is to identify and implement innovative and cost-effective strategies to increase the amount of decent housing at the low end of the private rental market. One of the tasks they undertook was to review data on evictions from 2005 through 2013. Working with the Data Management Office of Health and Human Services, they compared information on these eviction actions with people who are served by our departments. They found that 19% of the individuals had a prior contact with one of these departments, and 14% had a touch point after the eviction was filed. This indicates that the eviction action may just be one expression of housing instability experienced by these households over the course of their lives. Of those who had contact with the city agency, African Americans and women were overrepresented as compared to the general population. 53% were African American and 59% were female-headed households. An additional source of data is the Homeless Management Information System maintained by the Office of Homeless Services. From that system, we learned that when individuals and households who entered shelter between September 2016 and February 2017 were asked where they stayed last night, between 50 and 70% responded in a way that indicates that a robust eviction prevention program could have helped prevent their stay in shelter. I'm not going to go through the details, but there were slight differences between single men, single women, and families, but in all cases it was between 50 and 70%. CEO and the Office of Homeless Services work together on eviction prevention, as CEO provides funding through the Community Services Block Grant, which I have to say is zeroed out in the skinny budget, in the federal skinny budget. Anyway, CEO provides funding. What?
I said it's the emaciated budget.
Yeah, the emaciated, not the skinny budget. So they provide funding to homeless services to provide rental and utility assistance to Philadelphia residents whose household income is at or below 125% of federal poverty guidelines. These funds help resolve utility debt that acts as a housing barrier for shelter residents and provides rent or security deposits for tenants who are likely to become homeless due to eviction actions, L&I actions, or domestic violence. Since July 2014, the program has served 1,530 households, providing $1.16 million in financial assistance. But the demand vastly outpaces these resources. In fiscal year 16, 6,000 individuals sought assistance, and Homeless Services was able to serve only 800 of them. What can we do to more robustly address this problem? I think, as some of you know, I began my career 40 years ago working with low-income tenants to help them secure safe and affordable housing. I'm pleased we've been able to make progress on many fronts, and you'll hear about some of that in the other city testimony today. Yet, unfortunately, some of the issues remain the same today. Along with many others, I spent years training tenants because there were not enough lawyers to ensure that each was represented. Tenants often do not know their rights, as we heard in the last panel, and when they do, they may not exercise them for fear of retaliation or actual retaliation that they experience. Unfortunately, landlord-tenant court is intimidating for tenants due to lack of representation and, frankly, many other issues in the court. While we recognize the need for increasing legal representation for low-income tenants, we also understand that addressing these issues will require a range of strategies across a set of systems. These should include increasing awareness and coordination on issues impacting the ability of vulnerable and extremely low-income renters to maintain tenancy, including outreach and education on renters' rights and policies, court and law enforcement procedures, landlord responsibilities, and how to use current tools such as the Fair Housing Commission, and Rue is here today, and I'm sure we'll address that. As Liz Hirsch from Homeless Services testified in City Council last week, we also support the development of a strong homelessness prevention program using the evidence provided through the experience and research of the home-based program in New York City. Working together with other government agencies, nonprofit partners, landlords, and tenants, we can leverage key resources to reduce evictions and ensure more Philadelphians have a stable place to call home. This concludes my testimony. I want to make sure you're aware that Mitch Little from CEO and Liz Hirsch from Homeless Services are here today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Quiñones-Sánchez and Councilwoman Gim, Councilman Tottenberger, and Councilman Greeley. I'm Ann Fedulin, Director of the City of Philadelphia's Office of Planning and Development. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon to testify on Resolution Number 160988. Frankly, I can't think of a better way to spend my birthday than to be here testifying for the rights of our well-deserving citizens of the City of Philadelphia. Low-income renters in Philadelphia face many challenges. More than half of Philadelphia's renters are cost-burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for housing costs. In addition to the cost of housing, the resolution thoroughly documents the challenges low-income renters face regarding the quality of their housing. Unfortunately, the resources of the Division of Housing and Community Development available to address these issues have been shrinking. Since 2002, our housing funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has been cut by 46%, from $88 million in 2002 to $47 million in 2017. If we actually adjusted the $88 million in 2002 to today's numbers, just to stay equal, we should have received $122 million in 2017. Instead, we got $47 million. Nonetheless, we continue to take steps to address the needs of low-income renters. While the federal government's commitment to low-income renters has been shrinking, the city's commitment has been growing. In fiscal year 2002, the DHCD budget for low-income, elderly, and special needs rental housing was just over $10 million, all of it from federal dollars. In the current fiscal year, it is still over $10 million, but 46% of it is local funding from the Housing Trust Fund. As the federal government has cut, the Philadelphia government has added. DHCD continues to issue an RFP for rental housing production each year. And late last year, it issued an RFP for rental housing preservation. A rental housing preservation RFP was an action item from last year's assessment of fair housing process and will help us keep existing affordable units affordable. Our housing counseling program also includes counseling for tenants. Last year, more than 2,000 tenants received one-on-one counseling and 1,800 tenants attended group counseling sessions. We are currently on pace to provide one-on-one counseling to more than 2,500 tenants this year. Our tenant counseling, which is also available in Spanish, and hopefully we can increase the number of languages that we provide that help in, provides guidance around landlord-tenant issues, referrals to relocation and rental assistance programs, an overview of tenant rights during the eviction process, and referrals to legal assistant agencies. While we're taking steps now to provide housing and housing services to low-income tenants, we recognize that tenants have other needs that could be addressed in other ways. In last year's assessment of fair housing process, DHCD and the Philadelphia Housing Authority worked with stakeholders to identify goals and strategies to address a variety of issues, including those related to low-income tenants. To help promote healthy living conditions for tenants, we will explore with our city partners, license and inspection, health and PHA, and fair housing, and with our stakeholders, the development of a pilot program to help landlords make their units lead-safe and mold-free. To support increased co-enforcement of violations related to housing quality and health and safety issues, the city, along with tenant rights, legal aid, and fair housing groups, will look to identify coordinated and targeted code enforcement efforts and policies to promote increased housing quality. Perhaps most importantly, we will collaborate with our stakeholders and partners to identify resources and strategies to support tenant representation in tenant-landlord disputes. We've seen the effect an advocate by the homeowner side has had in foreclosure prevention. We'd like to extend that partnership to tenants. It will not be easy. Our budgets have been stretched thinner and thinner, and the HUD budget announced last week will not make our task any easier. Last week, I called the leaked HUD budget a war on housing, and it is. It's also a war on tenants. We are committed to affordable, healthy rental units and fairness in the landlord-tenant relationship. It would be helpful to have a federal partner to join with the city and our local partners to address these issues. The HUD budget notwithstanding, we stand ready to work with these committees, with this council, with our fellow city agencies, with the advocacy community, and with all the low-income tenants and renters in Philadelphia. Thank you for your interest in this important issue. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We're going to listen to the rest of the panel, and then we'll have the questions. Rebecca.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Quiñones-Sánchez, Councilwoman Gimm, and members of the committees. My name is Rebecca Swanson. I'm the Director of Planning for the Department of Licenses and Inspections. I'm here to provide testimony on Resolution Number 160988. I'd like to thank the committee for their interest in this important issue and for inviting Allan and I to be part of the discussion. I'm going to summarize my written testimony, which was rather long. There are approximately 270...
Yeah, Rebecca, your testimony is very long, but it is also very important because I feel like if you cut some of this stuff, then it may come up later on, so I'm a little torn
all
around
right.
some of the
Everyone get ready.
So if you can make sure you keep in the parts around some of the L&I licensing reform stuff and some of that for the record so people can hear it, so it doesn't come up later.
Okay. So I believe it's in my summary.
It's all in your written testimony, but I have a feeling some of those issues are going to come up if we don't cover them in your presentation.
That stuff's all in my summary.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
There are approximately 273,000 tenant-occupied units in the city. L&I is responsible for ensuring that the owners of these units abide by the Philadelphia Code, specifically the rental license requirement in Title IX and all the obligations under the Philadelphia Property Maintenance Code. We believe that many landlords do meet these obligations and that many rental units are code compliant. However, we know that there are landlords who, intentionally or not, place tenants in substandard living conditions. It is in these situations that L&I can use rental license regulation and code enforcement actions to hold landlords accountable for maintaining safe and code-compliant housing units. First, I'll look at rental license regulation. L&I is undertaking several initiatives to strengthen rental license regulation. This year, we implemented a new policy to deny landlords rental licenses if their properties have open code violations. Most rental licenses renew in February, so obviously this policy just went into effect last month. There were about 7% of our active rental licenses had open code violations. We obviously believe that this policy will bring that number down significantly. We don't have data yet, but it is something that we will share with the committee and with the public once we do. Starting next year, our licensing system will be able to reject rental license applications when we are notified electronically by the health department that the applicant had not submitted the required lead safe or lead free certification. We really think that combining the efforts with the health department is another level to keep landlords accountable. We're also exploring additional ways to hold landlords accountable, including requiring that rental licenses be renewed online and requiring that landlords notify L&I when they stop renting a unit. We also want to develop incentives, such as providing a discount on rental license fees for landlords who engage in beneficial practices, such as submitting a lead-free cert as opposed to a lead-safe, and whose properties are code-compliant for a period of time. In addition, we see an opportunity now to reform the certificate of rental suitability requirement to hold landlords to a higher level of transparency with their tenants, and we look forward to working with City Council and stakeholders on this. One challenge with rental licenses in Philadelphia is the number of unlicensed units. I said there's about 273,000 units. We think about 80% of them are properly licensed, which leaves about 50,000 unlicensed units. While not all unlicensed units have code violations, we know that some landlords do intentionally not obtain rental licenses in order to avoid any city oversight. In 2016, L&I found and cited approximately 3,800 unlicensed units. Moving forward, we have some staff resources dedicated to looking at tax records and hopefully utility data in order to determine the location of the additional unlicensed units that are not currently known to us. Looking beyond licensing, there is a code enforcement aspect to all of this. L&I inspects about 10,500 rental units for code violations each year. Most of these, almost exclusively, are based on complaints received by the tenants in the units. To put the number in context, our operations division, which has 45 inspectors, receives about 30,000 complaints and conducts approximately 80,000 inspections. That's both initial inspections and then all the re-inspections that are required when someone doesn't comply right away. We are aware that other cities have implemented a proactive inspection program under which all rental units are inspected annually or on a rotating schedule. You're not going to continue to clap. While we believe that this may be a worthy endeavor, we have not yet fully examined the benefits and consequences to determine whether the resource investment will truly improve housing quality and keep existing affordable housing units affordable. To inspect every rental unit in the city on an annual basis would require an additional 260 inspectors at a minimum investment of $17 million a year. A rotating inspection schedule that would require all rental units to be inspected every 5 years would require an additional 52 inspectors at a minimum annual cost of $3.4 million. One potential challenge with proactive inspections is that enforcement does not always equal compliance. And some of the first panelists testified to this. L&I came out, wrote a violation, and the violation was not complied by the owner. That happens. Only about a third of violations are complied after L&I's first inspection, and our overall compliance rate is about 70%. And that stays pretty consistent across the board for rental properties, owner-occupied. When a landlord refuses to comply violations, L&I has options. We take them to court to either be fined or to be ordered to comply by a judge. However, even these options do not necessarily result in the violation being complied. We have the power to order tenants to vacate properties that have code violations, but this is an absolute last resort, and it's only used in situations where the lives of the tenants are at risk, because that's leaving tenants homeless. And that's we do it very infrequently. And when we do it, it's in partnership with our other city agencies. But again, that's, other than taking somebody to court, that's the only other thing that we have. Given the resource implications that a full-scale proactive inspection program has, LNI has been exploring alternatives that would allow us to target inspections to the rental units that may be most likely to have unreported code violations, with the potential to scale the program up if funding becomes available. Over the last year, we have developed a list of landlords who own multiple rental units under various individual or company names. With this information, we will be able to coordinate enforcement action against these landlords who are repeatedly renting substandard units on a large scale. Anecdotally, the landlords who have multiple company names are typically those who are also going to be renting substandard units. We're identifying ways that we can also partner with the health department as they pilot a program aimed at making rental units occupied by children lead safe. We also want to expand our efforts to educate tenants on the quality of housing their landlords must provide and what they should look for when entering into a lease. We're hoping to do this with some of the changes to the certificate of rental suitability that I mentioned earlier. And we welcome suggestions from the committee and from stakeholders as to what would be the most effective. We understand the gravity of the housing crisis in the city and are committed to maximizing our available resources to find creative solutions to help protect tenants and create stability and safety in the affordable housing market. We will continue to partner with our fellow city agencies, city council, and stakeholders to ensure that we are doing all we can to ensure that existing rental housing stock is safe, code compliant, and properly licensed. While code enforcement has its limits, on-the-ground regulation against landlords who do not follow the rules and who prey on the most vulnerable tenants can be an effective part of the overall solution. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Get the low chair. I'm low riding again. Good afternoon, Chairperson Quiñones-Sánchez and Bass, and members of the License Inspection and Public Health and Human Service Committees. I am Rue Landau, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Fair Housing Commission, the agency that enforces the Fair Housing Ordinance, Chapter 9-800 of the Philadelphia Code. Thank you, Councilwoman Gim, for giving me the opportunity to testify today on this important resolution to examine the impact of evictions and substandard housing on low-income renters and to seek solutions to the problems. As many of you know, prior to joining the city, I worked as an attorney at a legal services organization and represented low-income tenants facing eviction. I am passionate about ensuring that all Philadelphians live in habitable rental housing and they are treated fairly and equally. We need multiple strategies to effectively tackle these issues. The work of the Fair Housing Commission plays a small but important role in improving the quality of rental properties for low-income Philadelphia renters and preventing evictions. Enacted in 1962, the Fair Housing Ordinance prohibits certain unfair rental practices by landlords and gives the Commission the authority to address unsafe and unhealthy conditions in rental properties through its adjudicatory hearings as well as through its investigatory and subpoena authority. Each year, the Fair Housing Commission staff dockets approximately 250 cases that are adjudicated through multiple hearings by the commissioners. Tenants file cases with our agency at no cost. Most parties are not represented by counsel at Fair Housing Commission hearings. Hearings are scheduled weekly. A typical Fair Housing Commission case may include a landlord who has not made repairs to a property despite receiving requests by the tenant. Often, the property has been cited for code violations by license and inspection or the health department, and the landlord does not have a valid license and/or certificate of rental suitability. Usually, the tenant is withholding rent due to the conditions of the property or the absence of the license or certificate. In most cases, tenants file cases with the Fair Housing Commission citing multiple and significant repairs needed, such as no heat, broken windows, faulty electrical wiring, leaking pipes, rodent infestations, broken stoves, ceiling leaks, and broken sewer lines. Unfortunately, after the tenant contacts LNI or withholds rent, the landlord frequently proceeds to terminate the lease, which is an unfair rental practice under the Fair Housing Ordinance. In this scenario, the case would be scheduled for a hearing by the Fair Housing Commissioners, who would hear the facts of the case and likely continue it to a future date to give the landlord an opportunity to complete the repairs and to obtain a license and a certificate. Under most circumstances, the commissioners will not issue a final order in a case until all the repairs have been completed and L&I has issued a notice of compliance verifying that the violations are in compliance with the code and the case is officially closed. By the end of a case, most landlords obtain the proper licenses and certificates as well. In 2015, 55% of the landlords named in Fair Housing Commission cases did not have valid licenses to rent their properties. In 2016, that number was reduced to 42%. Final orders by the Fair Housing Commission are appealable to the Court of Common Pleas. Significantly, Fair Housing Commission cases are completed before any eviction action is heard in landlord-tenant court. Municipal Court Rule 134 states that if a tenant files a complaint with the Fair Housing Commission before the landlord files a complaint of eviction, the court shall continue the case for a sufficient period to enable the commission to hold its hearings. Conversely, if the landlord files an eviction complaint in municipal court before the tenant files with the Fair Housing Commission, the commission cannot accept the complaint prior to the date of the eviction hearing. In 2016, only 20% of Fair Housing Commission cases proceeded to municipal court. The Fair Housing Commission is instrumental in utilizing the Fair Housing Ordinance to cause landlords to complete repairs on their properties and to bring them up to code. The Commission also causes landlords to obtain proper licenses and certificates to legally rent their properties. All of this occurs outside of the municipal court process, which makes the Fair Housing Commission successful in improving the quality of housing for low-income renters and preventing evictions. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Rebecca, I think this question's for you, okay? I want to know for the record, I think you got more applause than I remember Ellen and I getting.
Yeah, I hope this is recorded.
And I think it's great that going on, moving forward, licenses will be held up if there's any kind of violations. I think that's really the key to everything. But I just wanted to address the issue of the certificate of rental suitability as it stands now. Because you mentioned in your written testimony that it lists any serious code violations. Is that what the law says, or is that kind of how it's been interpreted? Because I thought it was any violations. And then how would you define serious as what, you know?
So currently, serious violations include anything really on the interior. It's not going to include things like weeds or trash or some of the more minor exterior violations that we would be issuing, say, a ticket for, as opposed to...
Is that what the law says, or is that how you're interpreting it? I'm not trying to fight with you.
That is how the department has interpreted it.
Okay.
But going forward, the certificate of rental suitability is now almost moot.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because you can't get a license if you have violations. So the only certificates of rental suitability that will be issued will be clear. Will show that there's no
violations at all. Okay.
So we think that this is an opportunity to revisit the law, what worked, what didn't, and what information can be included on it going forward that will be beneficial to tenants and hold the landlords to a higher level of transparency. Mm-hmm. So we're really looking forward to working with everybody on that.
Okay. I mean, that's good, and I think, like you say, in the long run, I guess it will take care of itself, but the word serious can be interpreted different ways by different people. And like you say, about high weeds, I'm going to steal Mr. Lord's argument that he always uses when I talk to him, is that high weeds can lead to rodents, which can lead to other things. So, I mean, you know, so I think no violations is probably the best way to resolve all this.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And before I recognize Councilwoman Gim, I think it's really important for us to understand that all of these reforms, you know, because someone doesn't get a license doesn't mean they stop renting. And so part of our concern is, while you want to identify people in noncompliance, it doesn't mean they stop existing. And so we don't want to create an environment where everything's under the radar and it becomes even more difficult to bring people out. So there's a couple of that. But I wanted to go to Rebecca's point around there's still 50,000 units that are not licensed. And, we've been in discussions and the advocates need to start paying attention to this. We've started conversations with PGW and PICO because they set up multiple meter accounts and they don't verify that the properties are licensed and zoned before they put that in. So there's an opportunity there to get some other stakeholders and eyes on the ground. And I say this because they have been very resistant to the conversation about that. And so that's work that we need to get done. Because for me, it's crazy that somebody can set up 5 meters and not have to do any verification process, similar to the towers who are allowed to tow without giving a ticket, right? Anyway, Councilwoman Gim had a question for Rebecca.
Yes, thank you very much, and I do want to thank all of our city agencies in particular, and thank you so much for working and expanding some of your work around tenants' work. I think that's really important. And Commissioner Gladstein, I wanted just to see if we could work a little bit with Nan Filer and the data that you've collected around the Stoneleigh Foundation, and would love to see if we can ask for more specific data that you might be able to submit to the committees. But I can wait on that a little bit. So, because I know we're trying to go through for the interest of time. Just very similarly, piggybacking off of what Councilwoman Quiñones-Sánchez said about PGW and PICO, I mean, it's not only that we could request that they do it, but could we access their utility data? And have we tried to do that? Or is that the part that they're resistant to? They won't even let us share their data?
We have to begin legal discussions, and Rue will appreciate this. Once you get lawyers in the room around confidentiality of consumers, that becomes an issue. I think that it's an area, Rebecca, you can respond to it. I mean, we just started those conversations.
We've started the conversations. We are told that there are some privacy concerns with releasing billing data. Because what we want to see is if your electric bill is going to somebody who's different than the property owner. That's typically what a rental property does. We have been told that there's some privacy concerns. So,
and is that the same thing like with revenue data? So like if the tax bill doesn't go to that direct property, are we allowed to?
No, we can use that, and that's the data we're going to start with because that's city data, but the electric bill and the gas bill, which the Councilwoman pointed out, really is where you're going to see find the unlicensed units and the ones that frankly aren't zoned to be multifamily, which presents a whole other level of safety concerns. That's what we're working on.
Okay, thank you. And then can you talk a little bit about what changes you've made in terms of collections around fines and judgments, or how that's evolved?
So that's done by the law department through the code enforcement unit, so I can't speak for them, but I can say that there is a new effort to step up collections, but the law department could, I'm sure, provide some information about that.
And does LNI track collection outcomes, or is that only through the law department?
That's through the law department.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilman Tonnenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First thing I'd like to do is wish Ann Fadulin a happy birthday. Your work for the city is very, very much appreciated. Ms. Swanson, there is a mediation process in the municipal court. Your knowledge of this, in the end, do you approve this in the sense that this dispute resolution program, it allows landlords and tenants to work together and maybe come up with an agreement? Does that work?
For landlord-tenant court?
Yeah.
So LNI is not involved in landlord-tenant court at all. Okay. We prosecute.
Well, in your opinion, do you think it works?
I don't have enough information on it as to how the process works.
Okay.
Rue might be able to.
Councilman, it's been 9 years since I practiced here, but in my memory, and I'm sure there's plenty of legal services advocates that can give you current day information, is that the mediation program seemed imbalanced to me in my cases.
Imbalanced?
Imbalanced,
really?
yes.
And
in that tenants who participated in it were not given a fair or equal deal. But I think we can save the question for the current day advocates who are in court every day now.
Okay. The other question I have is, from L&I perspective, is there a database that one could check? Suppose you wanted to be a renter. You wanted to see who has what violations. Is there any way to check who your potential landlord is? We always talk about references and checking things out. Does that exist?
Absolutely. You can go on to LNI's website and search by the property address that you're seeking to rent, and you can see if there is an active rental license and if there are any open code violations.
Because some of these people, when you really look at the earlier testimony that was given, these are awful living conditions that no one really would tolerate. And now you can applaud, because it's true. I mean, what you see here is really folks almost being forced to live in squalor, and no one is there to answer the door. And I think that's what the responsibility of government is. I mean, look, I'm a Republican. I like limited government. But I will also say this. There is a responsibility of government to make sure that people have a fairness, that people living, the landlord does what they're supposed to do. And that's what I'm concerned about, very much so. And I really thank you for bringing this forward, and I, of course, thank the sponsor of this bill to bring this into the light of day, because it really has to be a system that works and is fair to all concerned. Because there are also, conversely, small landlords that's all they have. Now, if they're playing by the rules and working with people, they also should be noted as well. And of course, those that are not paying by the rules and don't have a license and are allowing their apartments to go into squalor where people, I would agree with some of the signs here. It's a basic human right to live in a decent house. So the more knowledge we can get out to folks, I think the important thing, and I would look forward to working with the bill sponsors and others to make some real fairness here, because that's what we're supposed to do as government. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Real quick for Rue, because of the protocols around the filing of the commission versus municipal court, is there any discussions that could potentially be had with MC Court around that protocol? Is that an MC law requirement, or is there?
It's the municipal court rules, and they're certainly working better now than they have in the past. So we're happy that they're recognizing when cases have been docketed with our agency. They are continuing them, usually for 60 days. So we have an opportunity to hold the hearing first, and we keep them updated on our activity, and our letters and our status reports are uploaded to the municipal court docket. So right now is much better than it used to be in the past, so we're happy.
But
so
still, the requirement is if they filed at MC Court, you can't hear the case.
Unless there is a caveat to Municipal Court Rule 134, if a judge determines that the case is better heard at the Fair Housing Commission, the judge can send it to the Fair Housing Commission, which I've seen once in 9 years.
Okay. So that's a conversation.
That's the part we can work on.
Yes, that's a conversation with MC Court around that. I think, as similar to the mortgage foreclosure and other things, I think we've shown that once we start talking about some of these issues in a more public way, the judicial process can improve. So that's definitely an area for the resolution sponsor that we should facilitate and should talk about. Well, Councilwoman Gim, you had a...
Yeah, just briefly, just wanted to, again, reinforce what Councilwoman Quiñones-Sánchez said, and to thank the city agencies for a lot of the proactive work that you're doing. But in particular, I think a lot of this aspect of doing this is this more cooperative, broadly public kind of strategy. So a commitment to having our city agencies work together, and particularly opening that process up to our stakeholders who are here, I think will go a long way to help us not only recognize that this is not just about goodwill and good intentions and, what we're trying to understand with city agencies, but recognizing that so many of the stakeholders in this room could help us identify some of those gaps and problems that we're seeing, and maybe we can better strategize how to do that. So if we could, have your partnership and a commitment to that, working together, especially with many of these, with many of the folks who are here, that would also go a long way. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I didn't get to say happy birthday to Ann.
Yes, happy birthday.
I was going to make people sing to her, but she left.
Senior staff meeting.
But we look forward to the conversation. I know that for CEO and for Liz and that whole component for this year's budget, how we look and really demonstrate how much money we save when we're more proactive around some of this stuff. We look forward to that conversation. So happy birthday, Ann. She got away from us. Okay, so I'm going to call out the names of panel 3 and panel 4 so folks can begin to get ready. For panel 3, I have Emily Daldo from the Reinvestment Fund, Andrew Scherer from the Impact Center for Public Interest Law of New York, Kathy Carr, former director of CLS and adjunct professor at Penn. Following them will be Deborah Gross from the Chancellor from the Bar Association, Rashida Phillips, and Cindy Smokes. Oh? I'm sorry. Excuse me, wait. We are accepting people to sign in, and we'd be happy to have you sign in and testify in the order. What do you want to do since you knew they were coming? I'm not gonna put it up front. I'm not gonna put it up front. There's other people.
Constituents and others.
Well, we appreciate it. Again, we're happy to sign you up as the law and the protocols of this governing body. I did not set up the order of this, but I have a problem because there are people who are waiting. We have the Chancellor of the Bar who's waiting. It's a panel for other people. We promise we will move as quickly as possible. So, can we continue with panel 3? No, we want you to formally, we want you to formally introduce them on the record, as is our protocol, and have your testimony on the record. We absolutely want you to have that. Thank you. Our panel 3? Do we have enough copies for everybody, or what do you want to do? Just one copy? Okay. All right. Yeah, you want to put them all together? Good. Thank you.
Ready? All right. Okay, great. I guess that was my moment.
Thank you. Having come from that side of the aisle, it's kind of always awkward when you're on this side.
It's wonderful to see the energy, right?
Go for it. Go
Hi.
ahead, you can proceed.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here today to speak about this important topic. My name is Emily Dowdwell, and I'm Chief of Development and Implementation for Policy Solutions at the Reinvestment Fund. We're a community development financial institution based here in Philadelphia and operating nationally that through our loans and investments has created or preserved more than 21,000 affordable housing units, mostly in the Mid-Atlantic area. We also invest in grocery stores, child care centers, and other facilities that are essential to healthy neighborhoods. I'm part of the Policy Solutions group there, which conducts research and analysis on the design and impact of policies and programs related to building stronger, more equitable communities. We see housing stability as a critical issue for individual households, neighborhoods, and the city as a whole. Involuntary displacement from the home through foreclosure or eviction uproots families, makes it harder for parents to keep a job and for kids to stay in school, compounds financial distress, and exerts a destabilizing influence on communities. Past research has demonstrated the link between foreclosures and broader neighborhood decline. And while there's less information available about the effects of evictions, it's clear that more Philadelphians than just tenants and landlords are affected. In 2016, sociologist Matthew Desmond published an extraordinary award-winning study of evictions in Milwaukee titled Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. By embedding himself with several very poor families struggling to find and stay in decent rental housing, Desmond shined a light on the issue from the perspective of the families, the neighborhoods where they live, and those who own and manage the housing they occupy. Desmond's analysis of these experiences, bolstered by quantitative survey data, offered an extremely rich understanding of this important but understudied issue. Desmond's book, along with our own role in the research that supported the City of Philadelphia's 2016 assessment of fair housing, inspired us at Reinvestment Fund to examine the eviction issue locally. While there's been anecdotal information and reports from those familiar with evictions through either personal experience or occupation, and many of them are here today, we thought it was time to develop a local body of facts on the phenomenon and its relationship to poverty, race and ethnicity, and neighborhood well-being. To accomplish this task, we examined eviction filing records from the city's landlord-tenant court, which were compiled and provided to us by Philadelphia Legal Assistance. We used additional demographic and housing data sources for context. And I'll get to our findings in just a minute, but first let me just give a little background on the state of rental housing. Throughout Philadelphia, renters face considerable challenges associated with a limited supply of quality, affordable housing options. According to the ACS, more than half of city renters are cost-burdened, meaning they pay 30% or more of their income towards rent. For renters earning less than $35,000, that share jumps to over 80%. In addition, the city's assessment of fair housing found that the supply of publicly subsidized rental housing meets only 12% of need, and a recent study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia noted many subsidized units could be converted to market rate in the near future. In short, there are numerous renter households in unstable circumstances. In Philadelphia, the eviction filing is just the beginning of a process with several possible outcomes. The landlord and tenant can agree to mediation, the judge can make a finding in favor of one of the parties, or if the tenant does not appear, there can be a default judgment. Often, as others have noted, the landlord has an attorney, but the tenant does not. And these are just the formal evictions. There are believed to be many more carried out informally. For example, landlords may tell tenants to leave or change the locks, but we don't know how many there are. In Milwaukee, Matthew Desmond estimated that for every eviction executed through the judicial system, there are 2 others executed without any form of due process. Getting back to the formal evictions, there were between 19,000 and 21,000 filings each year from 2010 to 2015. That was the number after we removed some duplicates. We found that during that period, the citywide eviction rate as a share of rental units fluctuated between 7% and 7.8%, which equates to roughly 1 in 14 renters being subject to a court-recorded eviction filing each year. The rates were higher in lower income areas, and that was not a surprise, but now we know by how much. The rate was 3.6 times greater in neighborhoods where median income was below $25,000, compared to those with typical incomes above $70,000. Perhaps more notable were the racial disparities. In census tracts that were 80% or more African American, rates ranged from 10 to 11%, generally more than 3 times that of mostly white areas. We conducted a preliminary statistical evaluation at the tract level of the relationship between eviction rates, racial composition, income, and tenure, which is the mix of owners and renters, and it suggests that racial composition exerts a substantial and statistically significant independent effect over and above any influence of income and tenure on neighborhood eviction rates. Indeed, once an area's median household income and tenure differences were accounted for, each 1 percentage point increase in the percent African American residents in a census tract is associated with a 0.36 percentage point increase in the eviction rate. This finding is generally consistent with conclusions in the city's assessment of fair housing, which stated, eviction filings were more common in distressed and middle markets than in strong markets, and within each market type, areas with heavily black populations had eviction filing rates that were about twice as high as in areas with smaller black presence. For further analysis, we intend to explore the relationship between evictions and appreciating housing markets, where there is concern about displacement, and the intersection of evictions and unlicensed rental units, particularly as we seek to better understand the difference in eviction rates between African American and Latino neighborhoods. Groups that work in the Latino communities say that many residents pay rent exclusively in cash, and this could indicate that there are many unlicensed rental housing units there. And where landlords cannot legally pursue eviction, they may turn to informal processes to remove tenants. We're also exploring research on the relationship of evictions, poor housing quality, and community health outcomes. Many researchers and policymakers have noted that rising rents and stagnant incomes have put increasing economic pressure on renter households across the nation. It was estimated in 2015 that the annual income needed for a two-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia at the fair market rent was about $46,000. A household would need the combined incomes of 3.1 full-time jobs at the current minimum wage to afford that unit. To the extent that evictions are influenced by household income and related economic stability, as Matthew Desmond demonstrated, the immediate prospects are not bright for low and moderate income Philadelphians without significant changes in policy, enforcement practice, tenant education, and resource allocation. And there's good reason to pursue reductions in housing instability as a means to promoting stronger and more equitable neighborhoods. For example, what happens to a child's ability to thrive in school when they move from place to place and school to school on a frequent basis? And what happens in classrooms where a substantial share of the children turn over from one term to the next? How do elevated rates of evictions in a community relate to the social determinants of health? Or, as middle neighborhoods struggle to maintain a reasonable level of stability and quality of life in the face of increasing involuntary turnover, what are the future prospects for these vitally important parts of our city? These and other questions will drive future inquiries and policy recommendations that follow. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Carr. I'm an adjunct professor at Penn Law School and the former executive director of CLS, which is how I know most of you. I'm also co-chair of the Philadelphia Bar Association's Task Force on Civil Gideon and Access to Justice, which the Chancellor Deborah Gross will testify about, and which has been working to bring the need for counsel and eviction hearings to the public attention. Like Eva Gladstein, I started my career in this area as a law student 39 years ago. I represented tenants in municipal court. I'm just so pleased that we're having these hearings today and we're beginning a conversation that is important and probably we all should have begun long ago. I'm appearing today actually in a slightly different role, a national role, to present testimony on behalf of the National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel. And I'd like to say that despite the grim things we hear from the TRF report and the grim, and from the constituents who appeared here, that there is some optimism that this is, that what is going on here is, nationally is a movement for right to counsel in housing matters. The National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel is a nationwide association, and it's seeking to advance a right to counsel for indigent people in civil cases when their basic human needs, such as housing, are at stake. These efforts are in accordance with the American Bar Association's unanimous resolution in support of such a right. Across the country, there's a growing recognition that in housing cases, there is a critical need for legal representation, and that systematic representation has a dramatic impact. I want to thank the Joint Committees for taking up this issue and recognizing the plight of tens of thousands of indigent and vulnerable families facing the loss of their homes in eviction proceedings. Not just our city, but our whole nation has for too long been cavalier about people being forcibly thrown out of their homes and about the impact it has on their physical and mental health, their employment, child development and education, and indeed survival. But we have also failed to recognize the costs involved. By not spending the money for lawyers in housing cases, our city and state governments instead spend millions of dollars more on the avoidable costs of eviction, shelters, emergency medical care, prisons, public benefits, and more. Philadelphia is today showing national leadership by putting this issue in the spotlight and considering ways to help vulnerable and impoverished families in crisis, while at the same time saving the city the diverse costs it must bear as the revolt of evictions that are often inappropriate and even illegal. Putting a lawyer in courtrooms to represent all low-income tenants is actually a simple law enforcement step. Without representation, landlord lawyers can take advantage of tenants' lack of knowledge and experience, and tenants cannot present their defenses or enforce the laws passed to protect them. Our court systems are designed as adversarial. Fair results require that both sides present the evidence and law in their favor. This does not happen when one side is represented by experienced counsel and the other is brand new to legal proceedings. That's right. Too much is at stake when we are talking about a family's home. And even where the eviction is legitimate, lawyers can often help the tenant avoid homelessness by obtaining additional time for the tenant to move, securing emergency rental assistance, or assisting with overcoming barriers to public or subsidized housing. We saw this with our mortgage foreclosure diversion program, where even when people ultimately lost their homes, there was a lot of prevention and assistance that was provided. In our new and difficult national political environment, Philadelphia has been courageously showing that it will not stop working to address poverty, that it will stand up to protect the vulnerable, that our leadership will continue with creative and aggressive steps to improve this city and the lives of its citizens. Philadelphia has been a leader in assisting victims of the mortgage crisis, as well as ex-offenders needing expungement. We are building on early education and providing assistance to those in need of public benefits. Moving forward to provide a right to counsel in housing matters is one more important and bold step, one that will help move the national access to justice movement forward and will make us all proud. New York, you will hear more about New York City's vanguard work on this issue from my colleague Andrew Schur, but I want you to know that we are not alone. Other cities are also seeing the wisdom of providing counsel to tenants. The Boston mayor recently pushed the state legislature to guarantee counsel to low-income tenants. Bills have been filed. I won't say they're done, and they dubbed it a Homelessness Prevention Act. The bill followed a statewide study which found that tenants were twice as likely to stay in their homes when they were fully represented by an attorney than when they got limited assistance. Imagine how much more likely they were than if they got no assistance, as happens every day in Philadelphia's courtrooms. In San Francisco, the City Council created a pilot tenant representation program that is estimated, and this was just a pilot program, to have saved over $1 million in avoided homelessness costs. The Washington, D.C. City Council is currently considering a bill that would significantly increase representation in housing cases, and with a stated goal of moving toward a right to counsel. DC's effort is supported by a program there that has been providing representation with DC's money to tenants in subsidized housing and evaluating the outcomes of that representation. The bottom line is that across the country, cities and states are expanding housing representation, at least the leading cities and states, and are considering making such representation a right. Such an approach has the power not just to change people's lives, but to save large amounts of money for governments in the process. It's not always the case that doing the right thing for the vulnerable and the impoverished can also save money, but this is one such opportunity. I conclude by urging you to strongly consider the right to counsel as a powerful solution that will improve the safety and stability of rental housing. Know that there will be thousands cheering this leadership step of Philadelphia across the country. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name's Andrew Scherer, and I'm the Policy Director of the Impact Center for Public Interest Law at New York Law School. I also direct a Right to Counsel project at New York Law School. I, like several of the other people testifying, started my career in legal services about 40 years ago. I was in legal services in New York City for 32 years, started working in the South Bronx, and eventually became the executive director of the citywide civil legal services program called Legal Services NYC. I'm also a founding member of the National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel that Kathy Carr talked about. And I've been centrally involved in the effort in New York City to secure a right to counsel for low-income tenants. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify today about the growing success of our efforts in New York City. First, I want to congratulate you for this bold and important step that you're taking in really focusing legislative light on the eviction crisis in Philadelphia. Second, let me acknowledge right up front, New York City is not Philadelphia. Philadelphia is not New York City. The cities have many similarities, but they also have many differences directly relevant to today's discussion. There's differences in the legal landscape, differences in the housing stock and economic conditions, among others. But I do have no doubt that both cities' housing advocates and progressive policymakers share a vision of a world in which the lives, homes, and communities of the city's low-income residents are accorded the dignity and respect to which they're entitled by the courts, by administrative agencies, and by landlords. And I know many of us share the view that a right to counsel for people facing eviction from their homes is a key part of achieving that vision. However, each city needs to find its own path. So today I'm going to spend the rest of my time discussing how New York City got to where it currently is, which is quite astounding, a commitment on the part of government to guarantee universal access to counsel for all low-income people who face eviction in legal proceedings. Yeah, and look, I'm hoping that what I have to say about our experience will provide some instructive lessons. It's clearly not a blueprint. You'll have to find your own way. The right to counsel has been an issue on the sort of agenda of advocates for over 3 decades in New York City for the same compelling reasons that you're looking into it. It's really most fundamentally because it's so unjust and inequitable to deny people a meaningful opportunity to use the law to defend their homes when they can't, simply because they can't afford counsel. So in our experience, we had several decades of intermittent advocacy of a variety of types. We actually got the city to start funding eviction prevention programs over 20 years ago, but we really began to gain traction 3 years ago, in 2014, when a community organizing group in the South Bronx issued a report on the Bronx Housing Court, and one of their suggestions was a right to counsel. So it really came from a grassroots group. Then 2 council members introduced legislation that would create the right to counsel, and they almost immediately got 39 of the 51 council members to sign on as co-sponsors. And then we formed a coalition, which was a very great collaboration of grassroots community groups, of academics, of legal services providers. All of that happened in 2014. For the next 3 years, we worked as the advocacy community hand in hand with the legislators to build support. We knew that even with a veto-proof majority in the council, we weren't going to even get it to a vote without the mayor coming on board, and that was pretty much what the strategy was over the last few years. We were able to really continually broaden support for the bill. We held forums, we held press conferences, we had rallies. We brought in the bar associations, particularly the New York City Bar was very active. We got resolutions passed at the community level, at our community planning boards, and then at the borough level, almost every community board in the city came on board on this issue. We got the support eventually of the Central Labor Council, which is the umbrella for all the organized labor in New York City. We brought in ARP and other groups that advocate for the elderly. We actually had a letter from faith leaders, over 100 faith leaders, imams, priests, rabbis, ministers, in support. So the support really built. And then as we were building that kind of broad-based support, we also were able to answer the questions that were coming up. So one of the big questions was, like, how can we afford this? This is way too expensive. And the Bar Association got a private financial analyst firm to actually do a cost-benefit analysis study, and we were able to show through that study that the city would actually net $320 million by spending the money it would take to provide counsel. So the balance sheet was very much in our favor. That was enormously helpful. We got pro bono help from some of the big firms and some of the legal questions that were coming up at the council level. You know, can we really do this as a council? What does this mean at a municipal level as opposed to at a state level? And in the course of the last few years, the city actually began to significantly increase its funding. So it went from $7 million to $72 million for eviction prevention legal services, and actually the legal services programs haven't been able to absorb the money fast enough to hire, to scale up, to find space, to make people, promote people as supervisors. And then finally, February 12th, 6 weeks ago, the mayor called a press conference at a community room of a housing project, and he announced that he's going to support the legislation. And he committed not only to providing counsel for everybody who faces eviction, who is at or below 200% of poverty, he also committed that the city is going to provide a legal consultation to anybody who faces eviction, regardless of income. So you'll get some help regardless of income. And he's proposing adding $93 million more to the city budget over the course of 5 years so that everybody can have a guarantee of counsel within 5 years. Now, I think our effective and persistent advocacy certainly had everything to do with this happening, but there were other factors, right? We have as progressive a mayor and city council at this moment as we've ever had in New York City. And homelessness has continued to increase in spite of best efforts of the administration. Gentrification is driving people from community after community in New York City. It's an election year. The mayor's up for re-election this year, just saying. And the buildup of the eviction prevention program has already had a really stunning effect. Representation in housing court went from 1% to 27% with what they've been spending so far on an annual basis, and evictions have gone down by 24%. So almost a quarter of the evictions have gone down since this program started. So sort of, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And one other sort of comment about the moment, which is, when Trump got elected, we all said, what's going to happen now? How can we get this done in New York City? And you would have thought it might have made it more difficult. But actually, I think the national developments had a kind of the opposite effect. I think the fact that the president and Congress are clearly turning their back on human needs and looking to reverse generations of progress on civil and human rights, I think got the mayor to think, just like a lot of us, now more than ever we have to look to local and state government to assure that there are policies in place that foster equity, fairness, and respect, and that those policies have some place to flourish in the United States. So look, in Philadelphia, you're going to need to develop a local, viable strategy for achieving a right to counsel. I think you're well underway. Elements that work for us were really the grassroots community support from the people whose lives, homes, and communities are most affected. It was bringing in natural allies and some not so natural allies, but people who we could convince to come on our side. We actually got our former chief judge of the New York State, we call it the Court of Appeals, but the Supreme Court, Jonathan Lippman, to be part of our team, and he was, very instrumental. Sharpening the focus on the issue through the use of media. I mean, we got a lot of media coverage over the years. Studying and actually addressing with empirical data the questions that come up, and I know you've already started to do some of that. But at the end of the day, in Philadelphia, just like in New York, it's going to ultimately come down to whether you can generate sufficiently broad public support and the political will to take this bold step. So congratulations again for prioritizing this enormously important issue. Let me know how I can be helpful. I'd love to introduce you to the council sponsor, seriously, in New York City. I'd really love to get you guys together. I'm also happy to put you in touch with the people who did the cost-benefit study, if that would be helpful to you. And I look forward to a day in the not-too-distant future when we can say that both Philadelphia and New York City have established the right to counsel and set the national standard for more equitable and just cities.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Councilman Domb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you all for being here. Just a quick question for you, Mr. Sharon. You're from New York City, and we have an issue in Philadelphia that I talked about earlier that is a huge problem. We cannot distribute $100 million of federal money for earned income tax credits to 40,000 people. What are you doing in New York City? Are you aware of how you're doing this?
I agree with you that it's a really important issue and that people should take advantage of it. I'm not prepared. I just don't really know the data in New York City. I imagine it's similar, though, because I know the program hasn't been sufficiently well publicized.
We have 40,000 people in this city who can get checks and don't get the checks and can file back 3 years.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It is.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question for you as it relates to the reform work. What, if any, reforms happen at the court level, the state level, the court level?
Around access to counsel and around it. So actually, the chief judge was really pretty remarkable when he was on the bench, and he actually got the judiciary budget increased by $100 million statewide to provide legal services funding. So not just for housing, but for all civil legal services needs. And New York City has about half of the poverty population, got about half of that money. So we're having a bit of a renaissance in New York City around access to counsel in ways that I don't know that I ever expected to see in my career. So that has happened. They also have a post at the judiciary level. I think she's called Administrative Judge for Access to Justice, and they've looked at how they can make the courts more user-friendly and have the clerk's office better equipped, have lawyers in the court to help people out. So a lot of that's gone on, but none of it has been sufficient to actually protect the interests of low-income people in a complicated legal environment who need counsel to represent them, and that's something we really felt we could only get done at the city level at this point.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to thank you for raising the issue of the court involvement. I think what has gone on in New York State as compared to Pennsylvania State in terms of commitment to this issue, it just makes us look like we're decades behind. And I think both our local courts and our Supreme Court, one of the things our task force at the Philadelphia Bar Association has been doing is working with the judiciary and attempting to get the Supreme Court involved as much as we can. So I think that there's definitely a big role for the court. What happens to tenants when they walk into the courtroom every day is certainly very much controlled by the judiciary. And I think in the foreclosure program, we saw the power of getting judicial commitment and involvement to make changes. And I hope that we can get that happening in the tenant-landlord forum as well.
Yeah, no, that was hugely important to our success in having powerhouses like Judge Rizzo and other folks who were just really dynamic. I'm always concerned that we don't ask them enough, and clearly we have issues around funding our courts, and we go back, in terms of it's a county function, we have to fund it, it's, $200 million, and I just feel like because we're stuck with the tab, we don't ask them enough to have the political will. And I say that in a year where we're going to elect 10 judges. So folks, pay attention to this stuff, who we're electing, about their willingness to kind of reform. I think they're sometimes too isolated from the criticisms that we have to deal with here. So I'm always interested in what other folks are doing and how they're reforming themselves. I recognize Councilwoman Gimm.
Yeah, mine is not really, I don't really have a lot of questions except a lot of gratitude to thank all of you for your work. Emily, and the work of the reinvestment fund certainly helped build on what Matthew Desmond had already done in terms of waking us all up on this issue, but it was critically important to have the Philadelphia data, and my hope would be that we could continue to work with the reinvestment fund to continue to expand the data to understand it better so that we can build the greater case for ourselves. And then I guess, Mr. Chair, thank you very much, first of all, for coming here to our city. And, you know, I know that you had mentioned that New York had done intermittent legislation in between and, you know, resources, but we are starting pretty much, you know, we have not put enough effort towards thinking this through, and I'm trying to understand, like, did you start out with, like, small pots of money to expand access to services before moving into where you are now in 2016, or how did you kind of ramp up in addition to the public campaign around the legislation?
You're talking about how did the civil legal services programs ramp up services? I mean, there was a huge leap in funding over the last couple of years, and that's, it's like an astounding ramp up. I mean, we had maybe, you know, between 50 and 100 attorneys representing tenants in the city, not even full-time, and the legal services programs have, I just had a training event for them. They hired over 200 attorneys to represent tenants. It's mind-boggling for me because I've been doing this, you know, forever. You know, so, but it's all a recent development. I mean, there, you know, it wasn't really incremental. It was. I said that the effort was intermittent. The success has all been in the last few years, and I will say to you that not many years ago at all, people would say, oh, right to counsel, oh, you know, that's a really nice idea. Never happened, no way. You know, too expensive, too unrealistic. And, you know, I mean, we were persistent. The world changed. I mean, there were a lot of stars that lined up. We built a broad base of support, and now what seemed totally unrealistic or pie in the sky, utopian, it's happening.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councilman Domb?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just another question for you, if possible. If
I hope it's something I know this time.
Yeah, that's okay. If I read your testimony correctly, you said New York City increased their funding to $72 million. Yeah. And you also said in the testimony that the representations went from 1% for lawyers to 27%. In this past year, how much of that $72 million was used for that representation?
Oh, all of it.
72 million, the whole thing was
well,
used.
You know what, I mean, I think they are now up to an annualized spending level of 72 million, but probably the time of that statistic, the full 72 hadn't even kicked in, because I know the providers were busy hiring people, training people, finding space.
And how does it, just give me a brief overview, not long, brief, the representation of attorneys in New York City for tenants, how does that work?
Well, I mean, it's people either come to a legal services office and they retain an attorney, a free attorney. They don't pay for it, but you still retain the attorney. Or there are some systems that have been set up in the courthouse, and people will get counsel there. And then it becomes like any other.
And legal services is paying for the lawyers in that representation?
Yeah, this is all pretty, I mean, there's a little bit of pro bono representation around the edges, but this is all staff attorney model, paid attorneys who work in legal services, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you. We are going to move to our next panel. We thank you again. Thank you for coming from New York City. Our next panel is Debbie Gross, the Chancellor, Rashida Phillips from CLS, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Dan Taylor, since we have an opening in that panel, to move up. And then after this panel, we will have Linda Payton from Legal Clinic for the Disabled and Zena Williams, and I'm going to invite Phil Lord to join that panel. So Deborah Gross, Rashida Phillips, Dr. Dan Taylor, and then Linda Payton, Zena Williams, and Phil Lord. And just for the record, as we set up, just real important, we have written testimony for the record from Matthew Desmond, Harvard University, and the author of Evicted. Those testimonies, for those of you who want copies, are here to my left. Christine Young-Gertz from the Pennsylvania Apartment Association, David Thompson from Philadelphia Tenants Union, and as you saw, our very rambunctious crowd from Just Cause, who turned in their petition of 1,000 signatures, since we're not hungry and tired yet. I should say that for the record. Proceed.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Quiñones-Sánchez, Councilperson Gim, Councilperson Domb. I'm Deborah Gross, Chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association. On behalf of 12,000 members of the oldest association of On behalf of the 12,000 members of the oldest association of lawyers in the United States, I wish to commend City Council for holding a hearing on the eviction crisis. I am honored to be here today to provide an overview of the unmet need for civil legal aid facing low-income renters in Philadelphia. From my role as serving as a trustee, officer, and president of the Board of Trustees of the Philadelphia Bar Foundation for more than 12 years, I know that the resources at hand in the Philadelphia legal aid community are shockingly below the level needed to meet the demand for services by low-income Philadelphians who are facing a loss of shelter through court eviction or displacement from unsafe and unstable housing. There were more than 24,000 landlord-tenant cases filed in municipal court last year, but only the equivalent of 6.5 full-time legal aid attorneys were available to provide court representation to low-income renters in these cases. It is estimated that only 8.2% of all tenants involved in eviction cases filed in the municipal court last year were represented by counsel, and only 1.45% of those tenants were represented by a Philadelphia legal aid provider. The Philadelphia Bar Association has a long history of promoting access to justice for low-income people and in partnering with legal aid programs, courts, and other key stakeholders to launch successful initiatives that have made a profound difference in the city. In 2009, we officially declared through a resolution of our Board of Governors that representation by counsel should exist as a matter of right and at public expense to low-income persons in those categories of adversarial proceedings where basic human needs are at stake, such as shelter, safety, child custody, health, and sustenance. We formed a task force to develop and implement strategies to address the civil justice gap crisis and improve access to justice in the short term, working toward the implementation of a civil right to counsel in the long term for low-income people in cases where critical human needs are at stake. One of the priorities on which our Civil Gideon and Access to Justice Task Force focused was addressing the unmet need for legal aid by low-income tenants facing a loss of shelter through court eviction. A housing working group was formed to explore innovative solutions to improve access to justice for thousands of unrepresented low-income renters. This group envisioned and created the Philadelphia Landlord-Tenant Legal Help Center, a court-based, independent, collaborative project that was launched in conjunction with municipal court leadership. The Help Center is now managed collaboratively by several legal aid providers and other key stakeholders. The Help Center provides limited representation, brief advice, referral, and information to tenants for only 10 hours each week and is staffed by a part-time attorney who is funded by modest grants from private foundations. With a limited pool of legal aid attorneys available to represent low-income renters facing court eviction, the supplemental services provided by the Help Center and pro bono volunteer attorneys have provided some limited assistance to address the eviction crisis in Philadelphia, and these contributions are to be commended. However, the eviction crisis cannot be resolved unless the crisis in access to legal aid is also addressed. Increased funding is needed to bolster this limited continuum of services by providing more full-time legal aid attorneys. Pro bono alone will not solve this crisis. The Philadelphia Bar Association stands ready to partner with the city to address this crisis and work toward the creation of a right to counsel for low-income renters facing the loss of shelter. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on this critical matter. We are available to help in any way.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rashida Phillips, and I am a member of the Civil Gideon Access to Justice Task Force and the managing attorney of the Housing Unit at Community Legal Services, which provides free legal advice and representation to over 2,000 low-income tenants living in private and subsidized housing in Philadelphia each year, as well as significant advocacy locally, statewide, and nationally around affordable housing and protection of tenant rights. I have personally represented hundreds of tenants in housing court. We are grateful to have worked with City Council for several decades to protect tenants and promote safe, affordable housing. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on Philadelphia's eviction crisis today. In our city of brotherly love, every night the shelters are filled to capacity with 3,000 homeless men and women and about 1,000 children, while hundreds more are turned away. Philadelphia finds 900 or more of its citizens sleeping on city streets every night. The majority of these people are young, Black single mothers and their children, survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault, physically disabled or experiencing poor mental health, while most of them face one thing in common: they have been evicted from their homes. Eviction is one of the leading causes of homelessness in the United States and in Philadelphia in particular. Low-income families and individuals who lose their homes through eviction often end up in homeless shelters or in housing that is less affordable than the housing they must leave. Homelessness results in cost burdens on the city of Philadelphia in providing shelter and social services. Approximately $80 million is spent by the city each year on these costs: medical, transportation, and physical health care. On top of this are the costs that we do not see: victims who stay with their abusers because they have nowhere else to go, children who fall behind in school because they do not have a safe place to sleep, recovering addicts who relapse because they do not have a stable home base from which to attend appointments and get their lives back together. Housing is a primary need of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and a critical component in survivors' long-term safety and stability, yet interpersonal violence is consistently identified as a significant factor in homelessness. An alarming 92% of homeless women report having experienced severe physical or sexual violence at some point in their lives, and upwards of 50% of all homeless women report that domestic violence was the immediate cause of their homelessness. Homelessness, eviction, and substandard housing conditions are inextricably interconnected, with many families at risk of eviction facing one or more habitability issues. Among very low-income renters, for instance, HUD finds that 7.7 million households in 2013 were either living in substandard housing conditions and or paying more than half their monthly income in rent. Substandard housing conditions force families to abandon the daily routines of home life, from attending school and work to accessing health care and maintaining a safe environment. Children are at risk of asthma, infectious disease, developmental delays, and behavioral problems. Homelessness or precarious housing arrangements put family members at risk of trauma or abuse, leading to behavioral health problems that cut across generations. Substandard housing conditions create substantial health and safety risks to families, children, and all of Philadelphia, quite frankly. Habitability and housing quality issues also cost more for the lowest income households. Habitability expenses, medical expenses, other expenses related to substandard conditions, such as taking off work, legal expenses, and higher utility expenses because of repair issues and faulty equipment, further impact upon a low-income tenant's ability to keep up with rent and other household expenses, causing many tenants to become at risk of eviction. These same tenants fear retaliation from their landlord or property manager if they complain about those conditions or attempt to assess their rights and remedies as provided for in their lease or by law, as you heard earlier. The consequences of eviction go far beyond temporary displacement and loss of shelter. Judgments based on evictions lead to loss of housing benefits and compromise the ability to get into housing, private or subsidized, for the rest of one's life, leading to dangerous cycles of poverty and instability. Unlike a criminal record, even if you are able to get the judgment satisfied or vacated, it stays with you. In a city with a growing deficit of affordable housing, with lack of affordable housing, we should be greatly concerned. The affordable housing deficit is particularly pronounced and growing in Philadelphia, which is experiencing rising housing costs and rents. Lack of affordable housing has been consistently identified as one of the leading causes of homelessness among families with children, and the legal system can be quite punitive towards people who cannot afford housing. The eviction and affordability crisis becomes compounded by a lack of meaningful access to attorneys and the court system. As you just heard, of the approximately 24,000 eviction actions filed in Philadelphia Landlord-Tenant Court each year, approximately 81% of landlords get legal representation, while only 8% of tenants are represented. And of that 8%, only 1.45% of tenants involved in eviction cases were represented by a Philadelphia legal aid provider. This disparity results in part from the fact that there are only the equivalent, as you just heard, of 6.5 full-time legal aid attorneys in Philadelphia to provide full legal representation to tenants in landlord-tenant cases filed in municipal court. Due to lack of resources and capacity, the 5 to 6 public interest attorneys who do provide free tenant representation to low-income tenants are often or rarely or even always unable to meet the volume of need. In comparison, in the District of Columbia, 7 different legal aid providers employ 25 full-time legal aid attorneys focused on eviction defense, and another 10 attorneys employed who focus on other rental issues such as housing conditions and rental subsidies. Over 33,000 eviction cases were filed in D.C. last year, but between 40 to 50% were dismissed on or before the first court date. D.C. also has in place a robust continuum of supplemental legal services provided by a court-based help center, quite like ours, volunteer lawyer for the day program, and a law student clinic. Any tenant, no matter how smart or capable, is going to have a hard time winning when faced with opposing counsel. This power imbalance alone renders the court process unfair. Due to illiteracy, language barriers, disability, mental health, and other challenges, navigating the complex legal system becomes nearly impossible for most low-income tenants. Tenants without access to legal counsel often lose their homes simply because they do not understand legal procedures such as how to file or properly draft an appeal or to stay in eviction. Unlike their landlords, who typically come to court as repeat players with attorneys at their disposal, most tenants have very little knowledge of how to prepare and present their housing situations in court. Beyond tenants' lack of information and anxieties about an unfamiliar process, most tenants are so intimidated and unfamiliar with that process that they agree to having judgments entered against them, requiring them often to pay thousands of dollars, in some cases money that they may not even owe, thereby ruining their credit and waiving their right to remain in their homes. Judgments mean loss of housing vouchers, ineligibility for other public housing programs, and ineligibility for private housing. Reviews of Philadelphia Municipal Court data has shown that tenants with attorneys are far less likely to be evicted, while other studies and housing experts have widely acknowledged that providing legal aid to families and individuals facing eviction, lockout, or substandard housing conditions can significantly prevent homelessness by allowing tenants to stay in their homes, secure repairs, or negotiate smooth transitions to safe and affordable housing. As you also heard earlier, attorneys help tenants navigate the court process, negotiate agreements to stay or time to move, and in some cases can negotiate rental agreements that can fit a tenant's budget. Tenants don't end up with judgments or can negotiate better outcomes that don't bar them from future housing, ensuring access to future affordable housing. Investing in eviction prevention, including an increase in rental assistance funds and investing in a right to counsel for tenants, is cost-effective and is one of the best measures to prevent evictions, housing instability, and homelessness. I've attached a chart to my testimony that shows that we estimate that the work of the dedicated legal services attorneys and volunteers providing representation to low-income tenants has an impact of $13 million on our city, in addition to preventing the less tangible costs of homelessness, including the disruption in schooling, the loss of work, and declining physical and behavioral health. Legal aid is an effective tool to fight evictions and reduce homelessness in Philadelphia, and it is cost-effective. Beyond the substantial benefits of legal aid for individual low-income renters, legal aid also benefits our neighborhoods, improves the efficiency of our court system, and saves taxpayers money. Representing tenants in housing condition cases prevents neighborhood disrepair by helping to enforce laws that require landlords to maintain their properties. Effective tenant representation improves courtroom efficiency by holding landlords accountable for frivolous or unconscionable agreements and cutting down on procedural delays caused by pro se tenants filing inappropriate or inadequate petitions. I think we are on the brink in our city of being able to launch an exciting series of reforms that will go a long way towards achieving our mission, to provide legal representation to every low-income tenant who needs it, and to improve the condition of rental housing in Philadelphia overall. To that end, we will be very pleased to present any of these initiatives that, if adequately funded, would bring us closer to these goals. We would also be pleased to present several regulatory and administrative proposals targeted at better enforcement of housing code provisions and a generation of increased city revenues. Thank you so much for your time.
My name is Dan Taylor. I'm a pediatrician at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children. And first, I would like to thank Councilwoman Gim for initiating this extremely important resolution, for being an unwavering advocate for the health and wellness of families in Philadelphia, and for demands of justice for the children and families who live in poverty in this city. I would also like to thank Councilmember Quiñones-Sánchez, who also is an incredible advocate for the families we serve at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children in the beautiful part of Philadelphia, of North Philadelphia. This council and the hearings today are an important stepping stone in addressing an issue that affects far too many families in Philadelphia and adversely affects the health of these families. I'm here today as a pediatrician dedicated for the past 15 years to working with families affected by poverty to discuss the science behind housing insecurity, substandard housing, and evictions on the minds and bodies of the families that we are all here to serve and protect. When most people think about key individuals responsible for keeping children healthy, they think of doctors and other healthcare providers. However, I see every day the limitations of my profession. When children present to us with developmental delays, asthma exacerbations, sickle cell crises, elevated lead levels, poor school performance, and even worse, we know that these are the downstream effects of insecure and poor housing situations. As healthcare providers, we are only able to put Band-Aids on wounds that are much too deep and that require a more interdisciplinary and holistic approach. One of the tenets of public health is preventative care. Please consider the following example. If someone encounters 99 people out of 100 with diarrhea, they all drink out of the same well, one can treat each patient with antibiotics over and over again, or one can go to the well and figure out what is in it that caused this illness and stop it right there. In Philadelphia, the most impoverished large American city, in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and cities and towns across the U.S., that well is far too many in our children and families are drinking this toxic blend that stems from poverty, adverse childhood experiences, disparities in health and education, racism, food insecurity, and especially what we are discussing today, housing instability and the eviction crisis. This crisis crushes the most vulnerable under the thumb of illegal and unfair evictions, the shortage of safe and affordable housing, and the daily unconscionable choices that far too many of our families have to make to eat, to heat, or to hit the street. In fact, studies have shown that only 10% of health comes from traditional health care, the rest from social determinants of health, such as income, environmental exposures, and behaviors rooted in childhood. The U.S. spends the most on health care out of developed nations and the least on social care with the worst outcomes. This hearing, this council, this issue we are discussing is a way to help clean up the well that many of our families drink from because they have no other choice. A study in our emergency room screened over 22,000 families and found that 24% had food insecurity, 31% energy insecurity, and 40% housing insecurity. This toxic triad has devastating effects on our children. In this study, those families with housing insecurity had poorer health, their children were more at developmental risk, and had lower weights than families without. Science has shown again and again that children who live in stressful environments, such as substandard housing, the threat of eviction, homelessness, and poverty, have changes in their neurological system that affect their ability to learn, to focus, and to resolve conflicts. This toxic stress also affects the immune system, endocrinologic system, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, and even gets under our skin into our DNA. Children who live in stressful environments are more likely to be diagnosed with learning and behavioral issues, are more likely to have weight issues, are more likely to develop diabetes and cardiovascular disease as adults, and are more likely to die at a younger age. In the short term, children living in substandard and unsafe housings are more likely to be hospitalized, or more likely to miss school, or more likely to have elevated lead levels, asthma hospitalizations, sickle cell crises, and are more likely to die from these disorders from unsafe heating methods. One study showed that close to half of fatal fires in children were from alternative heating sources due to a utility shutoff. A harrowing illustration of the toxic effect of poverty, and with it, housing issues. One need only look at a recent Virginia Commonwealth University study that looked at mortality rates by zip code in 21 cities around the country. In New York City, a city at the forefront of fighting for the rights of lower-income tenants that we heard of already previously, the difference in mortality rates between the higher-income zip codes and lower was 9 years. In Washington, D.C., who are also advocating for low-income tenants, 8 years. In Philadelphia, 20 years. This lottery of birth is immoral. At St. Christopher's Hospital for Children, we have a unique medical legal partnership with the Legal Clinic for the Disabled, have a full-time lawyer that meets with our families where they are, in our exam rooms, in their homes, in the halls of justice, to help families struggling with adverse housing issues, utility issues, and eviction issues. Our families have benefited tremendously with this distinctive partnership, but this is not enough for the 135,000 children in Philadelphia who live in poverty and the 24,000 persons who had an eviction filed against them just last year. A stark example of this vital partnership is childhood asthma. 20% of children we serve have asthma. As physicians, we screen for adherence to medications and screen for possible triggers at home, but it's not until our medical legal partnership attorney gets involved and gets a landlord to fix the leaky roof, black mold, or exterminate rodents or infestations of cockroaches that we can truly make a difference in this child's health. To help sanitize the well of poverty and housing insecurity, to help level the playing field of landlord-tenant disputes, to help protect the health of our children and families, as well as the local economy, we must invest in a right to counsel for tenants in Philadelphia. We must act now. Now is the time our children's bones are being formed, their blood is being made, their mind is being developed. To our children, we cannot wait until tomorrow. Our children and our families need us today. Thank you.
Thank you for amplifying how expensive it is to be poor and now how deadly it is for our children. It's a very bad picture. Councilman Domb had a question for Deborah Gross, but he also had a question for Andrew. So if Andrew could come back to the witness table, I can recognize Councilman Domb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm going to start with Deborah Gross. The 24,000 evictions notices that were filed, how many evictions actually took place?
So it's difficult to know how many actually end up in actual evictions because the process is such that there's a process that you have to go through in filing writs to have a person removed from the property. So we would need to go through and see how many of those ended up with writs, and then even then, that doesn't always mean that the person was put out. They may have left before that point. So there's lots of variables that go into that. But there may be a roundabout estimate about how many of those end up in actual evictions. We think most of them do.
Right. Is there any way of obtaining that information?
I would have to defer to my colleagues at Philadelphia Legal Assistance who have compiled most of that data.
Okay,
so I can
thank
check
you.
in with them.
And do you have any idea of the 24,000 eviction notices that were filed, how many represented low-income renters?
So we do have that number, and about only 1.45% of those tenants got legal representation through free legal aid or pro bono representation.
No, my question is, of the 24,000 eviction notices that were filed, what percentage of the 24,000 were low-income renters?
So again, that may be a question that Philadelphia Legal Assistance or the Reinvestment Fund can answer. We don't know offhand what that statistic is. But we do, again, believe that most of them are low-income renters.
Right. I have a question for Mr. Sherrod, last question. You had mentioned that 27% went from 1% to 27%.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal. How many cases did that represent?
That would be somewhere close to 30,000 cases, because I think there's 120,000 cases on the docket every year.
So that
So
represents...
am I doing the math? Yeah, it would be about 30,000-ish.
So I'm just trying to get to the dollars. How much is that, doing the math, of $72 million for 30,000 cases?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Just I know that in one of the testimonies, I don't know if it was Ann Ferdulin or someone did some statistical numbers about how many preventions were done with our current dollars, so I'll have to get that for you, because it's in one of these testimonies, maybe when you were out. I rounded it off, it was something like $578 per person served, so I was thinking along your lines too. I have it somewhere here in my notes. I'll get it for you.
And I know there was an earlier question about judgment by agreements and the mediation process. Even though the mediation process has been much improved over the years, we do see that there still is a power imbalance between landlords and tenants, even through the mediation process, and that a lot of tenants do end up signing agreements that they may not have agreed to or understood through that process.
Could I just add something to my response to the councilman's question? So are we roughly saying about $2,000 per case? Is that, I didn't do the math in my head.
$2,400.
$2,400. Okay, so $2,400. I just want to contrast that with the cost right now of sheltering a family in a homeless shelter is over $46,000 for the stay. The stay is an average of 14 months.
And that's why I wanted to get those numbers out there, because I think that prevention cost is minimal compared to the overall cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Councilwoman Kim, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I wanted to thank, again, everybody here, and especially Mr. Taylor, for your tremendous testimony on, the staggering differences when we are looking at families who live in poverty, and especially on mortality. I think it's staggering and, calls us to real action. So, and one of the things I think that came out very clearly in Matthew Desmond's book was the discussion of what people do when they actually have stability in their housing and they spend it all on food. So children's nutrition automatically improves and health rates go up, and we start to see improvements around academic performance, and we can get to those places. And the interconnectedness that I think you and others have established between housing security and poverty and all these other health factors, and recognizing that eviction can't just be seen within the capitalist market framework of a dispute between a landlord and a tenant over contractual rights and obligations, but more framed in the broader public health narrative, is a really important reason why we are having this hearing, so that we don't get into the mindset that this is just something that has to be framed in those particular ways. And then with Ms. Phillips in particular, one of the questions is, and this can also be for our chancellor, so we currently have 6.6 individuals covering X number of cases. I think it worked out to something like each one of those individuals carries about 350 cases a year. Would that be about right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Pretty efficient, I would say, or excessive.
When an attorney takes a case, it doesn't, most of the time, it doesn't actually even have to go through the trial process, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's more even representation, I will say. The imbalance.
Could you speak into the microphone?
The imbalance becomes balanced, as one of the earlier individuals who testified said that once she got an attorney, the case went away. So oftentimes that is found.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say for my colleague that Ms. Phillips' testimony about for every dollar that is spent on legal aid, it's assumed that about $11 is saved in additional services that go out. But for Ms. Phillips, do you feel like, based on some of the work that you've done, and I don't know if this is another question for PLA, but does CLS and others, are they able to adequately serve the need, or do you actually have to turn people away?
We are not able to adequately serve the need. We have to turn people away very often. At CLS, we get on intake over 100 clients a week sometimes, and we are just not able to meet that need. So we have set up a program with Deckard and a few other law firms to refer cases over, and VIP as well, and they take a lot of those cases and are able to represent many of the tenants that we have to turn away due to our low staff capacity. So.
Mm-hmm. And what happens when individuals are turned away, particularly with regard to this area? Do they just get information? What are they?
Yeah, so if they come in through our intake, they're definitely given advice through the intake process, and then we refer over to hopefully provide them with a legal attorney through our referral program through VIP or a volunteer attorney through another firm. So, but they are given advice. We also refer people to TURN. You'll hear from TURN in a little bit. As well as the Landlord-Tenant Help Center. We have a relationship with the Landlord-Tenant Help Center and are part of the collaborative. So we try to work together to cover the need. We're also trying some other things with the other legal services organizations in the city. We've set up a tenant advocate sort of referral line and group. So we're trying different things to try to cover the need, but by and large, we're not able to handle it.
And one of the questions that we're trying to understand a little bit better is also the evictions that happen outside of municipal court. And I know that it might be Ms. Martin's case that seemed to indicate that there are illegal evictions that are happening. And do you have any sense about the scope or ways to be able to understand the kinds of evictions that are happening outside of municipal court processes?
Yeah, it's really difficult to determine that, obviously, because there is no statistic or way to account for illegal evictions. But I think the statistic that we heard earlier, that there's over 50,000 properties that, about 50,000 properties that have no license, we can assume that in many of those properties, people are being illegally evicted. And we can also assume, a lot of things about particular neighborhoods and particular places, in immigrant communities and other communities where we think that there's higher rates of illegal evictions just because of the circumstances. And also, even if there is a license, there's a possibility that your landlord is doing an illegal eviction. And I think a lot of people get confused through the process because, when the eviction process first starts, you're supposed to get a notice, and that notice says you may say you have 30 days to leave. If a person doesn't understand that their landlord still has to file something in court, they may leave at that point, and that's not really an illegal eviction. But again, not understanding your rights, that your landlord does have to file, does have to go through an eviction process, you lose a lot of people at that point as well. So that's in addition to the illegal evictions that are happening. And there is an anti-lockout ordinance in the city, but it's not evenly enforced. And again, what can happen when the locks are changed or they're constructively evicted because the landlord turns off the utilities, or all of these things are ways that people are also illegally evicted. That's not just a straight up lockout, So there's lots of different circumstances where it comes up, and it's hard to account for how often it's happening, but we know that it's happening a lot. And we see a lot of that at CLS, and there's sometimes things that we can do, but sometimes there's not much that we can do.
And again, I think this is a city council that's really thoughtful about housing and housing rights, but in particular, I think it's worth a review of our ordinances that deal with renters in particular, and to make sure that the ones that we've got on the books are appropriately enforced and strengthened. And so I look forward to your or any group or organization submitting additional advice on administrative or legislative changes that need to happen. Sure. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then for Mr. Scherer in particular, I know that New York City is just kind of unfolding on its major venture, but is it your understanding that the right to counsel will largely be outsourced as opposed to being handled within the city department?
The city's...
It'll go out entirely to legal...
but there are quite a number of providers in New York City, but they're going to do this through nonprofit legal services providers. They're not going to do it through municipal employees. Yeah.
And did foundations or any other organizations kind of contribute towards this effort, or in what ways do they help lead up to that?
There's been some foundation support and some private support for the advocacy effort to gain the right to counsel. The implementation part has been what we've been able to get the city to do. So there's I think there's no private funding at all going towards the provision of counsel.
Right.
But I've gotten some foundation grants for some of the work that there's been some of that kind of thing.
Thank you. And thank you very much to our Chancellor of the Bar Association. It's great to have you here. And, I know that the helpline is currently at 10 hours a week, and I'm sure it's probably one of those early indicators about how people are maybe at the front lines of experiencing questions or problems, whether we're hinting at illegal evictions or other types of issues before they even make their way to a CLS or other places. And I'm just wondering whether there's been thoughts about the helpline operating. I mean, obviously all of this is resources, but the helpline operating at, it's great that we have it at 10 hours a week, and I'm just curious about if there's been any other places that do it on a more extended basis, and what that would mean in terms of helping us either address the issue before we have to reach legal assistance, or whether it's going to help us better understand data or other information.
Well, so we would like to have it more than 10 hours a week, but the funding is the issue, and the volunteers. So you can't just have, a pro bono attorney answer a helpline. You actually need to have somebody who's trained, and so we have lawyers, legal aid attorneys who are training pro bono attorneys, so we are, limited in that aspect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councilman Domb. I just wanted to refer the testimony by Eva Gladstein around the work that CEO and the Office of Homeless Services provides through our CSBG grant. Since 2014, the program has served 1,530 households for about $1.16 million, which comes out to about 750, but that's utility, rental support, and all those things. I did ask Eva before she left that we were going to ask for some quantifying data during the budget process so we can look at all those buckets, because there are different buckets of resources. I think it's a more than appropriate kind of ask so that we can see it that way. Councilman Domb, you have another question?
That was my last question. Thank you. Anyone on the panel can answer this, but are you recommending that we reallocate funds from the returns that Councilwoman Gim talked about? For every dollar of prevention, we're saving $11 on the other side. So you're suggesting that we reallocate funds that are currently going to the homeless program to the prevention and having attorney representation?
No, we're not advocating that. We're advocating that you increase the funding for legal aid.
Oh, you're advocating us to have more taxes to fund this versus, but the return's unbelievable. For every dollar, $11 are saved.
I don't think it would work out immediately, so therefore by taking the monies immediately from other services, you would be, in essence,
So you might need a one-year bridge.
Right, you need a bridge.
Okay. Your father would have asked that question. Thank you.
Thank you all to all the panelists. Our next panel, thank you so much again for all of your work. Our next panel is Linda Payton from Legal Clinic for the Disabled, Zena Williams, and Phil Lord. After that, if the next panel can pull itself together or get ready, it would be Erin Blair, who's a nurse family, part of the Nurse Family Partnership, Rachel Fakov from the Philadelphia Interfaith Hospitality Network, and Dr. Young from the Policy Lab at the Children's Hospital. After that, I only have one last panel, and I'll read those names as soon as we finish this panel. So we're moving it along. What time is it? 1:30.
Do you mind if she goes first? She's
No,
not
she has
feeling
my
well.
glasses. I don't have any shoes.
You can't go anywhere.
Yeah. I'm going to read this list.
Hi, my name is Zena Williams. I thank you for hearing my story. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, a proud mother of a Temple University student suffering from serious health problems. My income is SSI, which is $724 a month. Last July, fleeing from domestic violence, I started looking for an apartment. At the time, my son was with me and was attending CCP. During this apartment search, I was fortunate to be able to stay with a church friend, but for a few months, it was a temporary situation. Then started looking for an apartment I could afford. The most I could afford is $600 a month. I looked at so many apartments and soon discovered what $600 gave me. I knew I couldn't be picky, but I also believe my son and I deserved to live in a place that was clean and safe. I did not find an apartment that I could afford, and there were problems, but the landlord promised she would make the repairs. During this time, I was also in and out of the hospital. I went in and out because of stress caused by my heart atrial fibrillation. I needed to have a stable home for me and my son. I had to stop couch searching. I also, because of my medical problems, I knew would eventually need surgery, and I just had my surgery a month ago. I do have another mass in my chest that needs to be taken out. I gave the landlord I gave her required deposit of last month's rent, and also received financial assistance through Lucent Settlement House, which had gave me 6 months. Anyway, I was supposed to move in July the 1st. The lease was a month to month. I have photos. Do you have the photos?
Do you have the photos?
Okay. The photos. So you will see the condition of the apartment before I moved in. The landlord promised she would have the apartment cleaned up by July the 1st. Came and I communicated with the landlord that I could not move in with these conditions. I texted her promises and she never did anything, including the dirt, the grease, the walls, the kitchen, broken smoke detectors, filthy bathroom, damaged floors. The stove was in disarray, covered with grease. The floor tiles were loose. After many attempts to have the landlord make the apartment inhabitable, and she did not, I had no choice but to move in so me and my son can stay together because he was on his way to college. I did not talk to the landlord I talked to the landlord about reducing the rent because I knew I would have a major cleanup. She agreed. I cleaned the apartment best I could and moved in July the 9th. If you look at the conditions of the stove, even after cleaning the stove, it did not work. It took me more than a week for the landlord to respond. The gas company came out and tagged the stove unsafe. Finally, the landlord installed a new stove. I also had no hot water for over 2 weeks. The toilet did not flush and still does not flush properly. After moving in, I also gave her a handwritten letter listing the cautions of problems with the apartment. And then I received a handwritten letter from the landlord under the door around July the 12th. The letter was dated July the 1st. I'd like you to read the letter. In all of my relationships with my tenant, I strive to have a positive and happy, fulfilling relationship. I have not been able to accomplish this with you. This is only after 15 days notice that I'm being terminated from my lease. Please vacate the premises within 15 days. The landlord filed an eviction complaint on August the 16th. The certification of rental suitability was attached, but it was on July the 22nd. This was the first time I saw the certification. The reason the landlord gave the eviction evicting me because I was refusing to surrender premises of the property. I feel that a lot of these landlords, they get over on people because they don't know their rights. This is not the first landlord that did this to me, but I hope that it's my last. Suffering the way we did. Suffering the way we did. I had a teenage son that suffered with domestic violence with me, and he got a full scholarship to Temple University. I'm also, and the legal aid referred me to the legal counsel for disability, and they helped me out a lot so I wouldn't get evicted. But that apartment is still in really messed up conditions. But I have no other choice. Where can I go besides a shelter? And I'm suffering from a lot of medical issues, which I cannot go into a public shelter. If I do, I'll probably die.
Could I just say one thing, Councilwoman? Madam Chair, thank you. And Ms. Williams, thank you so much for your testimony. I can't tell you what it meant to read it before you came in here, and how urgent it was for you to share your story, and in particular about the attention that needs to be paid to a lot of the things that are off the books, essentially. And I think that that's in part what happened with, the threats that you get, and that we have so many people who are subjected to these kinds of things that don't ever have the benefit of seeing legal assistance and feel overwhelmed with a lot of it. And, the fact that you put forward $1,800 to live in those kinds of conditions is another proof of why this hearing is so urgent. And, I'm incredibly grateful that you took the time to come down here.
There's a lot of landlords out here that see women that's in domestic violence situations, and they take advantage of them.
Thank you.
And I feel like maybe some kind of organization should be started to help women that's in domestic violence situations so they don't have to go through this. Because like it was said earlier, once you get those evictions on your record, nobody wants to rent to you. And then what do? Especially if you have medical issues. You can't go in a public shelter, you'll wind up dying because no one cares.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Williams, thank you for your testimony. In your testimony, you stated that this wasn't the first time you had this situation. Can you describe the previous situation you had with a property owner where you either were in a inhabitable rental unit and
one property that was really, really, really bad, but I had to take it so me and my son could stay together because of domestic violence. The landlord totally took advantage of me, took me to court and said that I owed her $8,000. I thought that I did not have a choice but to sign the papers because I didn't seek out legal help. They take advantage of you if you don't know, and at that time I didn't know.
And in both these properties, can you describe the properties? What type of property? Was it multifamily property, multiple units?
It was a multiple unit. Usually it's an apartment, I always got the second floor because I thought there would be a better safety issue.
On the upper floor?
Yeah.
And did you have any relation with any of the other tenants in the property in this situation or the other situation?
Usually I didn't talk to anybody. I couldn't speak to anybody. I had no friends because of the domestic violence. You can't have any friends. You can't go talk on the telephone. You can't do anything. But since I got out that relationship, I volunteer. I tutor first graders. I'm going to volunteer at St. Christopher's Hospital to tutor kids that can't get out to learn. My son, again, has a full football scholarship to Temple University, and I want to be a good role model at this point for him.
Right. I just want to commend you also for your strength in breaking that cycle of domestic violence and showing your son a different way, and that he will be successful at Temple, which is my alma mater. And I guess my question also is that were other tenants, to extent, although you didn't have communication with them, but were they other tenants in those properties of similar family makeup? reference to maybe single mothers or?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm
And in
reading-
domestic violence. I want to become a advocate for children and women for domestic violence because it is a better way. Since I'm out, I know that it's a better way.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking those questions because having, I do know some property owners and they, the more reputable property owners, try to get a certain type of tenant mix, and it seems like the more scandalous property owners also try to focus on a certain tenant mix.
Yes.
That's why I was asking those questions.
Yes.
It seems like they're trying to identify a certain tenant where they can take advantage of
Yes.
those tenants, provide
Mostly
a
women,
subpar.
yes, and they see, it's some kind of, to me, it's just a certain look that a woman has when she's being battered, and they see that, and if they, like, the cops are always at my house, so they just take advantage of it.
Right, because it seems like these type of, property owners are looking for a certain type of tenant that they believe may not be as empowered and will be willing to look at that unit as a unit of last resort. And
Yes.
be able to rent out any old unit
Yes.
to a person, and so.
That's
because of-
what it was
right,
here.
Right.
Because after I stayed with my church member, I wanted to keep me and my son together. So I felt like I had to take this property.
Right.
And even though I asked her to fix it up, she said, oh, sure, I'll do it. So eventually I wound up fixing it up myself. So me and my son could stay together until he left to go to school.
Because you felt you had no other choice but that unit
Yes.
that was uninhabitable.
Yes.
And something you could afford as well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you again for your bravery.
That was a moving story. Thank you for sharing what you experienced. My name is Phil Lord. I'm the Executive Director of the Tenant Union Representative Network. We are a nonprofit housing counseling agency. We provide a variety of services. We're a tenant service and advocacy organization. We believe that housing is a human right, and that has to be recognized. And once we do recognize that, we'll be a lot better off. We'll save a lot of money and direct it in the right direction. But clearly, eviction defense and eviction prevention are key components of that. And as an organization that's funded by the city, we do all that we can to make sure that those things are addressed. I'd like to talk a little bit about so much has been covered. I'd like to talk a little bit about things that have been touched on that I think need to be elaborated on a little bit, and then I can turn my time over. One of which is the certificate of rental suitability. Frankly, I want to say that I am troubled by the direction that some of the things that LNI is doing is really good, and some of the things they're doing is not so good. And the notion that the licensing requirement and certificate of rental suitability requirement should be limited to serious violations creates total chaos in the system because no one knows what that is. And if you have a code violation, you don't know whether it's an obligation or not. And it really is confusing. But beyond that, the idea that, and it was just mentioned, but I've heard it so many times, I want to make sure people understand, the certificate of rental suitability is not just about documenting violations. It's also about letting tenants know what their rights are. This Partners in Good Housing Handbook is really critical to that. And the landlord signs the document saying and certifying that, in fact, they will make sure that there are no code violations on the property. There's nothing else that does that when you move into an apartment. That commitment by the landlord is an explicit commitment to the tenant. It creates additional legal rights, and it's very important to maintain that. Not to mention the fact that violations that accrue during the year have to be addressed as well. So I'm really nervous that people think that maybe the licensing requirement satisfies that problem. When it comes to cease and desist orders, I heard that they're only done in the most extreme situations. At Turn, where we see thousands of tenants every year, in the last couple of weeks alone, we've seen tenants who come in who have cease and desist orders on the property because of zoning violations. Now, I'm not sure what an emergency is deemed to be by LNI entirely, but certainly some of the zoning violations we've seen do not seem to be urgent and do not require someone to move out. We've even seen when we've organized buildings, large buildings, some landlords have actually removed plumbing. I'm sorry, I can say, mysteriously plumbing has been removed from buildings. I'm not sure who did it. To create a cease and desist situation where, in fact, the city becomes the evicting party by saying all the tenants have to get out because the services aren't there. And there's no real effort to penalize landlords around this. There's no real consequence to having relocated the tenants. And so we have this process where some landlords, and they're the worst of the landlords, I must say, they're not very many, but they take advantage of this system to get tenants out of their properties. That's another form of eviction that we don't see. We don't see the 24,000 is the tip of the iceberg. That's already been mentioned because most people, for the reasons that were testified to by Ms. Williams, are afraid of being evicted. Once you get an eviction record, we have people coming to our classes who are more worried about an eviction record than they are about repairs or about the eviction process itself, because they know that's going to make it much more difficult for them to rent in the future. And that's not just a difficulty. That's part of a downward spiral that Matthew Desmond talks about in his book, where he says every time you get evicted, you're less likely to go into a decent place. So people are, and we have this computerization now, which works, helpful for tenants in some ways, but landlords are able to go and see if you have an eviction record just by typing in a few digits. And the bottom line is people are seriously penalized for having fought their landlord. We were in a ridiculous situation. It still exists, and we're trying to fix it. But if you withhold rent, and because there's no heat, and the judge decides you shouldn't have withheld all of the rent, you should have withheld 90% of the rent, a judgment is entered against you for 10% of the rent. And you have a judgment on your record saying you didn't pay your landlord 10% of your rent. That's absurd. There's a new process that's been in place. It's served 4 tenants so far, but that's been the history up until now, whereby someone can avoid that judgment if they're sophisticated. But there are serious problems around that only having a lawyer can help you address. Discrimination is something that hasn't been mentioned very much, and I want to make it very clear. We're living in a climate where we can expect and already have seen increased discrimination based on things like religion, immigrant status, things that were always an issue and always a problem, but have come up to in a higher level, and we can expect more of that. One thing, another addition to that is I'll give you an example. There was a building in West Philadelphia near Drexel, and the landlord bought 2 buildings very close to each other. They were occupied almost entirely by people with the Muslim faith. The landlords systematically evicted the people when the leases were up very often, 3 at a time, 4 at a time, did not say anything about the Muslim faith, but then began to put other people in the building. There was no reason given why he was evicting everybody in the building. And that's why, even though we had a lot of noise about it, this just cause eviction issue is really critical. We are spinning our wheels to a large degree if we don't recognize that if a landlord doesn't have to say why they're terminating a lease, then they can do it for very bad reasons. And you have to read their minds and come up with some profound evidence, or maybe they're just foolish enough to admit what they're doing. But very often, everybody has a reason for what they do. And so, in fact, when they say, we have no reason, I'm just terminating the lease right now, that's a cover for something. And very often it's a cover for discrimination or landlord complaining or sexual harassment that wasn't yielded to. And so until we have a system where landlords have to say why they're doing stuff and you can second guess that process, we're going to have a real problem in terms of enforcing any of the laws that we have on the books. So I just want to raise that as well. It's not always clear, and it was alluded to already, the cost of moving for a low-income tenant is very significant. When you have to come up with $2,000 to $4,000 to move, if you've just moved in a place, you are stuck. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the laws or whatever else, but you are stuck there because, in fact, you cannot go anywhere. You don't have the money to do it. And that's something we have to recognize when we come down to these processes, because it is a really tragic situation when people are suffering that way. Something that Matthew Desmond pointed out in one of his analyses after the book was he was wondering why some tenants get agreements in court and some tenants don't. And these are unrepresented tenants for the most part. And when they looked at it, they were surprised by the result. And the result that they found was that the tenants who had children were much less likely to get agreements than the tenants who didn't have children. When you control for everything else, this was still true. There's a parenting penalty in leasing that's out there right now, and we have to be really clear about it. As we enforce laws like a certificate of less-safe status, we realize there's going to be a backlash and a response of saying, I don't want to rent to families with children. And until we really have strong enforcement of discrimination laws, we're not going to be able to do much about that. And that requires attorneys to do that, because it's a very difficult and sophisticated process. So those are some of the things I want to mention. I think that it's, from TURN's viewpoint, we are a housing counseling agency. We provide classes every day, twice on Wednesdays. We have individual one-on-one counseling for people to come through our classes. We realize that our work is much more effective if we have rental assistance programs that go along with it. We see people who are in temporary short-term crises, need the money to move, like domestic violence situations, who don't have that resource. We want the council to look at that, see if we can expand that as well. But the bottom line is we do need more lawyers. There's no reason in the world why someone should go have something as important as their housing at risk and not have legal representation. None of us would want to have that for ourselves. We shouldn't tolerate it for others. We can't tolerate it for our children. We can't tolerate it for the people who are low income. And so I'm really appreciative of this effort to try to lift up this issue and making sure that everybody has an attorney at some point. So I want to thank you for your time on that.
Yeah, we'll take our next panelist and then we'll ask questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Payton. I am the Executive Director of the Legal Clinic for the Disabled, also known as LCD. I want to thank Councilmember Helen Gim and Councilmember Maria Quiñones-Sánchez and their amazing staffs for bringing us all together today to address the crisis. I am before you today as a spokesperson for LCD, Homeless Advocacy Project, Senior Law Center, Women Against Abuse, and the AIDS Law Project. We all serve especially vulnerable populations in the housing and eviction crisis in Philadelphia. LCD has been housed at McGee Rehabilitation Hospital since 1990. As part of its programming, LCD has developed 5 medical legal partnerships, MLPs, with hospitals and health centers at 7 sites in Districts 3, 4, 5, and 7. MLPs place attorneys alongside healthcare professionals in hospitals and health centers to address health-harming social determinants of health that are legal in nature, such as substandard housing, eviction, and homelessness. LCD staff, as you have heard, LCD staff visit clients in their homes and see firsthand the deplorable conditions they are forced to live in. As you have heard, they live with mold, sewage, and vermin, and without utilities or water. Our clients overwhelmingly report that their requests to their landlords to remediate are ignored. I am here to talk about the acute burden that these problems impose on the at-risk individuals we serve. They are people with disabilities who struggle to remain independent in their communities, veterans at risk of homelessness who suffer from serious mental illness, including post-traumatic stress disorder, seniors who may have lost their homes due to foreclosure, who are now unable to pay for one or more of their basic needs, such as food, shelter, and medication, and survivors of domestic violence, who lack the resources to rescue themselves and their children from their abuser. They are people who do not know their rights and who are afraid to complain because they have no place to go when the landlords retaliate. The population we serve are especially at risk of homelessness and to suffer from health-harming consequences of substantial housing conditions and eviction. The lack of shelter services for our clients make eviction and substandard housing even more dangerous. Accessible shelters that meet the needs of people with disability are scant. There are no age-sensitive shelters for our seniors. If there is space for our clients, the shelters are often not equipped to meet the varied and complex needs of these vulnerable populations who may rely on attendant care, experience mobility issues or medication technology dependence, have cognitive issues, are vision impaired, or experience mental health issues. The vast majority of our clients who seek legal aid services are living in rental properties. Our agencies constantly hear stories of clients paying exorbitant rents for properties that are infested with rodents and vermin, covered in mold, or full of backed up sewage. Many are near a state of condemnation. Substandardized housing conditions such as mold or inadequate heating act as triggers to already acute conditions. Despite the fact that people may be compliant or try to be compliant with medication and health care routines, they are unable to stay healthy because of their environment. Our clients often fall victim to unscrupulous landlords who pursue such tactics as illegal lockouts, which you've heard, where they ignore due process and legally required procedures and simply change the locks on a tenant's home when they are away, or failing to pay the utility bill, resulting in loss of water, heat, and electricity to the tenant. One landlord actually posted an eviction notice on a tenant's door that he had created himself in order to scare her away. Remedying illegal landlord practices is not easy. While there may be statutes and regulations addressing such problems, the reality unfolds very differently. Clients are often afraid of filing a complaint with license and inspection for fear of retaliation, or if the building in which they live is condemned, they fear becoming homeless. For families with children who may be receiving services in the home, parents fear risking DHS involvement if the home is deemed unfit. Seniors and people living with disabilities are afraid of being placed in nursing homes as their only alternative. And people living with psychiatric issues often go to the streets. Many of our clients have never been a party in a judicial proceeding or have even been in a courtroom. Our clients who are facing eviction face unique challenges. They may be physically unable to go to court, seek representation, to see a letter sent to them, to listen to a conversation, to speak, or to even remember yesterday's conversation. They are at a disadvantage from the start. Despite the fact that many of them have viable defenses to the eviction, or to at least abatement of the amount of rent owed, they are unaware, as you have heard of many other scenarios, of their options or rights to fight back. The vast majority of landlords are represented and without counsel to advise them. As you have also heard, many tenants are wrongly pressured into signing payment agreements that they cannot afford or that include money that was not legally owed. Excuse me. This is what our collective legal services agencies working with vulnerable populations know for a fact. Having an attorney is not a luxury. It is a necessity for the proper and fair handling of eviction cases in landlord-tenant court and to provide proactive legal services against slumlords who prey on vulnerable populations. We know that for many, having an attorney means the difference between having a home, facing homelessness, or living in a nursing home. Having an attorney means knowing one's rights, standing up to enforce them. Having an attorney makes a difference. Having an attorney meant that a child with profound cerebral palsy, completely dependent on technology to survive, was finally able to live safely in her home. Her landlord had ignored her mother's pleas to address the property's vermin problem for months, and as a result, the child nearly died when a cockroach became lodged in her tracheotomy. Within days of receiving a demand letter from the family's attorney, an exterminator was at the property to remedy the problem. Having an attorney meant that a survivor of domestic violence and her 3 asthmatic children were finally able to relocate to a safe, healthy home after years of living in an apartment building overrun with mice and cockroaches that reeked of urine and feces in the hallway and that had the heavy smell of crack cocaine coming through the door that was too small for the frame. Having an attorney meant that a senior who was illegally locked out of her home while at her doctor's appointment could finally access her home, critical medication, and necessities of life. With a simple phone call, the attorney was able to open that door for her. Having an attorney meant that a woman living with HIV, whose unlicensed landlord retaliated against her for withholding rent by going to her apartment and illegally shutting off the gas and water, was able to get that water and gas turned back on and get legal assistance to prevent further violations of her right. And finally, having an attorney meant that a woman who proudly served this country would not become one of the tens of thousands of homeless veterans when a landlord was being paid through a VA grant and was simultaneously in breach of the lease by refusing to fix sewage and plumbing problems and a broken lock on the front door. When the tenant withheld a portion of her rent to pay for the repair herself, the landlord filed eviction. When a HAP lawyer showed pictures of the apartment to the landlord's attorney in court, the landlord agreed to finally withdraw the complaint. Philadelphians should not have to face these issues every day, but they do. And far too often they do so without the benefit of counsel. However, this is a problem that can be fixed. Enhanced enforcement of existing city ordinances would result in change that can protect tenants from abusive landlord practices, uninhabitable living conditions, and wrongful evictions. A landlord should have a license to rent. If they do not, they should be fined, and that fine should actually be collected. L&I violations should be taken seriously, and inspections should take place. Landlords who do not comply should be sanctioned and monitored until the problem is resolved. No landlord should be licensed to rent if there are unresolved issues or known habitability concerns. Having a lawyer is critical, yet access to service is scarce. We need more lawyers. We are part of the group of agencies that comprise the 6.7 full-time legal aid agencies that provided representation in eviction cases in Philadelphia Municipal Court in 2016. You have heard the number of evictions filed last year from the last panel. You also heard how underrepresented the defendants were. As a legal services community, we are working as hard as we can to protect as many people as we can, but there are not enough of us. We need your help and are asking the city to join forces with us to help even the playing field in municipal court and in the city of Philadelphia so that our clients and their children, citizens of this city, can live safe, healthy lives. Thank you so much.
Councilman Green.
Thank you. I want to thank Ms. Payton and Mr. Lord for your testimony. Ms. Payton, when you were testifying from your organization perspective, it made me think that not only are women and also men sometimes, like Ms. Williams testified, who are vulnerable, it made me also think about people from the disabled or difference community who want to live independently, and because they may not have the ability to rent at a certain location, this may be the only location where they may be able to rent and have to deal with some of the same deplorable standards that Ms. Williams talked about. So thank you for your testimony. Another reason why we need to expand the now legal services that are provided for people, not just those dealing with domestic violence issues, but also for those who have some type of physical or learning difference and want to live independent lives, and not having the legal channels and ability to do that may force them to go into some type of home or some other type of living environment. Mr. Lord, I wanted to ask you a question. You raised something earlier about zoning, and one of the questions I had was you made reference to property owners using the zoning code as a way of doing evictions. Are you referring to properties that may be a single-family property that would not zone as a multifamily property, and now they're being able to use that as a way to evict someone by way of L&I, saying that, well, this property is not zoned properly, and so you can't be here? And I think I wasn't sure if that's what you're alluding to, or other type of methodologies people are using. I'll just say very creative self-help techniques.
Yeah, actually, I conflated two different situations. Okay. One is where L&I, on its own initiative, shuts down a building because of a zoning violation. Mm-hmm. And
what type of zoning violation?
Well, it was used as a rooming house when it should have been a single family.
Gotcha.
And
Right.
We understand the need to try to correct those situations, but the idea that it should happen in a matter of days under a cease and desist order seems inappropriate. So we were concerned about using that technique of a cease and desist order for that problem. It seemed like an inappropriate remedy, and we've seen it more than once. We've also seen landlords who would do things more aggressively, like turn off utilities or disable their heating systems in order to get multi-unit buildings vacated so they can do whatever work they wanted to do there to upgrade the building and put different people in there. So that's another tool where actually L&I is manipulated to be part of a process that circumvents due process, and we've seen that happen as well.
So in those situations where you have, say, a property that's a single-family property being used as a rooming house, and L&I gets noticed and they do some type of enforcement action, what has been your experience on what happens to those tenants in those situations and in the property as a whole?
Well, they have to move out right away because L&I issues a cease and desist order, and their being there after that order could result in a trespass. So that's a serious problem, and so people are put out.
And then after that, are you seeing those property owners remedy the issue and then try to rent again?
That's the problem. I don't, and maybe I need to find out more, but I know of no system whereby L&I follows up on these issues and make sure that there's compliance. I've seen tenants in problem buildings that were cease and desist orders were issued where the previous owner had the exact same problems, and the building was just turned over to somebody else who then used it the same kind of way and had the problem.
And that's my concern, that you could have a property owner who has the property under, let's say, since you're here, I'll say Lord and Hayward LLC, and then they get a cease and desist from L&I, and then that property gets transferred toward Hayward and Lord's. LLC. And they just changed the legal title to the entity that owned it, but they continue to rent their property out, even though they may get a cease and desist order. They just use that, a cooling period, had the people remove, and then they just all of a sudden start renting again, knowing that for many people, this is the only type of housing they have available at this price point based on their income. And people are willing to just take, or are willing to take a unit regardless of how habitable it is, because they don't have a lot of means at their disposal.
And not only they don't know about what's going on.
Right.
But the separation between L&I and the law department is a very serious problem because there really is no effective enforcement. Landlords know that if they just wait it out, all they have to do is maybe pay for an inspection, and it's a lot cheaper than spending the money to do the repairs.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists on this one in particular, especially because it's late. But Mr. Lord, thank you so much for all the work you've done with TURN. It's been incredibly important and powerful to have strong advocates within the city who are working on tenants' issues and education in particular, which I think, as you pointed out, is the most effective means to ensuring that people have stability. One of my questions is that you seem to raise some concerns about the certificate of rental suitability. And there was earlier testimony from the commissioner that, they're moving towards the licensing will ensure that there's no code violations and those things. But you seem to raise concerns about that. And could you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, the certificate is primarily a vehicle for tenants to be educated and for landlords to make a commitment to tenants. It's not simply a code enforcement technique, and it needs to be understood that way because, and not only that, I mean, it's to me, it's amazing that we can have a law that says you can't issue a license if there are code violations, and almost 2 years after that law was passed, it's still not being consistently enforced. That's a simple thing to do that should have been happening, but that apart, you need something that's going to let tenants know what their rights are, because very often tenants don't realize L&I is, they don't know how many smoke detectors should be in a building, they don't know that L&I could do free inspection. All those things are in a booklet that they can look at. And I think most importantly, if a landlord says and signs that document saying there are no code violations, even though they're none of record, a tenant gets that paper and says this is not true, and wonders why the landlord's lying and wonders what to do about it. And that triggers a process of code enforcement that doesn't exist otherwise. So relying on L&I to look at licenses alone is not sufficient.
Mm-hmm. And so you would raise any concerns that there were changes to the way that the certificate of rental suitability is handled?
I think it's been effective. It should be enforced even more, and I think it needs to be kept until we have something a lot better. What's being suggested is not better at all.
And are there vehicles for you to communicate that concern with L&I, or would you feel like it's helpful to have one of the things obviously that we're looking for is improving the level of collaboration between these different departments that we're working together, but that we're expanding that conversation to include our stakeholders as well.
And I think what you're doing is tremendous and it needs to be followed up on. Councilman Greenlee raised the issue because we shared it with him and he contacted L&I about it, and they seem to be pretty firm about it. But I think it's a very important issue that has to be addressed.
They seem pretty firm about what? Getting rid of the certificate?
No, I'm sorry, that's not correct. What they seem to be firm about is using the standard of serious code violations.
Right.
That standard, which I think undermines the foundation of what we're trying to do, is a serious problem. But this is another step that would be beyond that, and certainly we don't support that either.
And there's the opportunity to communicate that on a more significant basis directly with L&I has been not that easy.
No, we haven't done that. The first I heard their reference to it was in these hearings, and that's why I raised it when I did.
And again, I appreciate the fact that you raised your concerns, because I think that helps us a lot in terms of understanding better about the areas and the importance, again, of having stakeholders at the table when we work with our city agencies, because there are some things that certainly make sense from the city end of things, but are viewed in a completely different way from a tenant's rights or a stakeholder angle. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, Ms. Williams.
For 13 years, I never...
Can you just speak into the microphone?
For 13 years, I never knew that the suitability was out there. Because when I went to court, when this lady took me to court, 1 month after I gave her 6 months rent, she tried to evict me and the gentleman upstairs. He won because he didn't have it, the letter of suitability. I never knew it existed. A lot of people don't know that it exists.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very
much to this panel.
All right, so for the next panel, we have Aaron Blair, Rachel Falkov, and Catherine Yoon.
Good, how are you? Nice to see you again.
Thank you so much for your patience. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We are just going to take a short break for our wonderful stenographer who's just done a yeoman's job on handling this hearing. Thank you. She's been here all day, actually. Yeah, non-stop hearings back to back. So we're just going to take a few moments. Thank you. So we're back. Thank you so much to our panel for your patience and to other testifiers who are waiting. I just want to take a moment to recognize Councilman Squilla. Thank you so much for being here. And we will call this next panel.
For this panel, we have Elaine Blair, Rachel Falkov, and Catherine Young.
Hi, I'm Erin Blair. I'm with the Philadelphia Nurse Family Partnership. We're a program for low-income first-time moms. We follow our families from the time they find out they're pregnant until their baby's second birthday. You guys have my written testimony, and thank you so much for having me speak today. Listening to the other professionals and individuals that testified today, I really feel that they covered a lot of what was in my testimony, and I'm going to try and keep it brief because it's late.
And we're hungry.
One area that wasn't covered, so I'd like to say, Nurse Family Partnership, we have 6 different domains that we try and serve families in. Nursing is traditionally a very holistic practice. I've been doing this job for 9 years, and last year we were lucky enough to have a grant where we have a legal partnership, a nurse legal partnership. We now have 2 full-time staff lawyers that serve our families to prevent issues, to represent them in issues, and to mitigate issues with housing and the other domains that we work in. So there's really no way to tease out all of these different domains. If you don't have steady employment, meaningful employment that pays enough, you can't afford to maintain your housing. If you don't have good environmental health, it affects your physical health, which means you miss days of work, which means you lose income, which means you lose your housing. If you are caring for a child and you don't have adequate supports like child care assistance that's readily available, you lose your housing. If you don't have good medical care or understand the process of application for benefits, you lose your housing. It's all tied together, and there's really no way to tease it apart. What's unique about the Nurse Legal Partnership that's housed within my office is that our legal team does a full survey with families on each of those domains and areas that they can assist them in. So not only do they prevent eviction or represent families that are going through an eviction, they also help them to keep their gas turned on or to get their bills remedied or give them referrals towards agencies to help them with other debt to free up money so that they can be on top of paying their rent. And I think oftentimes in the housing argument, it's looked at as sort of like binary, black and white, like either you have housing or you don't. But housing insecurity is really something that exists on a spectrum. All of the families that I work with are at risk. All of them fall below that kind of, when you look at the spectrum, they're all at risk because they're all low income. All low income families have some form of risk when it comes to housing. In the past several years, whenever I would get a phone call from a family about a housing issue, my heart would sink. It felt inevitable. I knew what was going to play out. They would lose their housing. They would become homeless. They would turn towards the agencies that exist to help in emergency situations and be turned away repeatedly. They would choose to live in very unsafe housing conditions, often without a lease at all, because a lot of, there's a lot of unleased housing options going on in Philadelphia for the lowest income people. They may have lived with a family member and sacrificed all of the money that they're getting in food stamps to be able to be allowed to live with their great aunt who gives them a mud room at the back of the house. Like there's so many different ways that families try to keep a roof over their heads and keep safe. And unfortunately for pregnant women and young mothers, they're some of the most afraid to reach out for assistance because of the fear of unsafe housing leading to DHS stepping in and removing their children, or making them leave the only roof or situation they have and potentially risking losing their children. Another unique thing, I just want to share one story. One of our clients' recent experiences shows something that wasn't discussed today, which is after moving into an apartment, she was 8 months pregnant, she noticed there was no heat, no stove, sewage backup in the basement. The landlord neglected to comply with all the Philadelphia lead law and other rental laws, and the Department of License and Inspections issued multiple violations. The landlord eventually filed an eviction against our client, who chose to withhold rent after tolerating the conditions for 9 months. Our legal team was able to not only get the eviction overturned, so that she also filed a counterclaim against the landlord and won. So that tenant was awarded $9,600 in damages, or I'm not sure if that's the right word, for the rent that the landlord had received because he had illegally been renting that apartment that was unsuitable. It doesn't seem, oftentimes tenants have no legal representation, but even when they do have legal representation, very, very rarely does the landlord get anything more than the lost rent, and then they just flip the apartment and rent it again. So I really think having a system that allows legal representation, but also allows for clients to file claims against the landlords when their children are injured by lead, when their children are injured by asthma, when they've missed work as a result of court dates, things like that. So I will turn it over to these ladies because I know it's late. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think you've all heard from me last week. My name's Rachel Falkov, and I'm here representing the Family Service Providers Network, which is the group of homeless service providers in Philadelphia, and we're 21 different organizations who provide emergency shelters, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing to families of our community experiencing homelessness. We were here in front of this committee last week, the Housing Committee, Neighborhood Development, and Homelessness Committee, to present a request for homeless prevention funding, homeless prevention assistance. And our ask was relatively simple, although it's not necessarily so easy to accomplish. We wanted to prevent homelessness, have a pot of money for homelessness prevention at the front end of the system. We wanted to, and that was through $3 million from the Housing Trust Fund. We wanted to also have housing at the exit from the system and strengthen that, and that's again through the Housing Trust Fund. Those are our only flexible dollars right now that really exist for developing prevention money, for finding prevention money. And then we wanted to ask for the City General Fund to support to strengthen the core of the homeless shelter system, because they are the homeless shelter system is stretched to the max, and people can't even get in the first place. Homelessness, eviction prevention is a very, very big part of homelessness prevention, and that really gets to the last page or two of my testimony. It requires funding for targeted rental assistance, coordinated financial management services for families, and legal support. And we do have models that we would like to be able to bring to Philadelphia. The home-based program in New York partners with community legal groups and paraprofessionals, and actually most of the cases are not actually handled by lawyers. They're handled by paraprofessionals to guide households through the eviction process, fighting the eviction process, and to support households in court through their cases. The outcomes of these cases are usually much more favorable than if the household goes in with no trained support. And I don't know if any of you has ever gone to housing court. I certainly have with our families, and you can see a very big difference between those who go in with assistance of any kind, including legal support, and those who go in by themselves. Often the home-based representatives are able to recommend very simple solutions, and they are also able to provide targeted financial assistance. Not all the people being evicted are victims of substandard landlords, landlords with substandard housing. Some of them really legitimately cannot afford to pay the rent for whatever the reason. But then once they get into being evicted, then they're doomed to terrible housing from this point forward in their lives. So the cost of doing eviction prevention work in New York is about $2,000 per household. The cost of homeless shelter for a family for a year is $44,000, $45,000. You don't have to be a mathematician to do the math. We need to be able to find a way to prevent eviction and prevent homelessness in the first place. I think that a lot of the answers that we get come from the word partnership between legal communities, healthcare providers, housing and homeless providers. We need a partnership in our communities, and we need our solutions to be neighborhood-based. A poor family is often working 2 jobs to afford the rent, and they do not have time to run down to court, run down to a bunch of meetings, go for legal assistance on 3 days a week from 10 to 12 when it's open, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's 9 to 1, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. We need more assistance for these people, and we need the assistance to be more local. I think we have to work smarter, and we have to work together, and we need to also work with our landlords, our responsible landlords, who are willing to partner with us. I did speak last week about PIN's master lease program that we have tried, and actually we're just admitting a family to a new lease today. And this is a family that was evicted 5 years ago, and it is still on her record. And the eviction was not even fully realized because she managed to pay off her rent in the meantime. And stayed in this place for years afterwards, and then when she went to look for another apartment, That's when she realized that she could not rent anything that was decent. So we need to work together, and we need to do something about this problem, and you're the people who can fix it. So thank you.
Good evening. My remarks are brief. My name is Catherine Yoon, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, a pediatrician at the CHOP Refugee Program, a faculty member at the Policy Lab at CHOP, and a volunteer pediatrician at Puentes de Salud. I want to thank City Council for examining the impact of eviction and substandard housing on the health and well-being of low-income renters, and for me in particular, on children and families. As a pediatrician, I know that safe housing is important for all children. As Dr. Taylor eloquently testified, unsafe housing can lead to lead poisoning, asthma attacks, preventable injuries, and even deaths. This has been demonstrated in research from across the U.S., including research conducted in Philadelphia. In my experience as a pediatrician for refugee and other immigrant families, I know that when immigrant families live in unsafe housing, they face an additional set of challenges. Because of concerns related to immigration status, immigrant families may be uncomfortable interacting with authorities to seek redress. Others worry that by complaining about landlords, they might invite retaliation that would compromise their applications for permanent residence or citizenship. Finally, language barriers prevent many immigrant families from understanding how to identify safe housing or how to seek help when housing is substandard. Like many Philadelphia pediatricians, I frequently identify children who have elevated blood lead levels. Among my patients' parents, who are largely immigrants, not a single one has understood that landlords must provide lead-safe housing for children 6 and under. According to my colleagues in the Philadelphia Refugee Health Collaborative, some landlords have also told refugee families that they, the renters, are responsible for paying for lead-safe certification for rental units. If families are unable to pay for the certification, the landlord will refuse to rent to them. Solutions to address substandard housing in Philadelphia must include provisions for language access, including outreach to communities with limited English proficiency. In the Philadelphia metro area, approximately 10% of children have at least one parent with limited English proficiency. We know language barriers are of particular importance for Latino and Asian children. Unfortunately, disaggregated data are not available for families from Africa, the Middle East, or Europe. However, in our region, 38% of Latino children and 42% of Asian children have at least one parent with limited English proficiency. At highest risk are the 27% of Latino children and 29% of Asian children who have no English proficient parents in the household. Although comparable data on language proficiency are not available for children in Philadelphia alone, we know that the city has a higher proportion of adults with limited English proficiency than surrounding counties, and that the school district has a high proportion of English language learners. Further, in the CHOP Refugee Health Program, over 90% of children have parents who need interpretation and translation services. Hence, housing policies that do not address language access are likely to disadvantage a large proportion of children in Philadelphia and to produce inequitable outcomes for Latino and Asian children in particular. I close today by commending this committee for investigating this issue and allowing CHOP and other members of the community in attendance to share our thoughts and strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel. Councilman Green?
Yes, thank you. I have a quick question in reference to the nursing legal partnership entity. How long have you been around? Because that's a unique dynamic of a nursing provider with legal services. So I was just curious in reference to how long have you been around and the service that you provide?
We just began the nurse legal partnership 1 year ago? Yeah, it started approximately a year ago, January, and they actually came into our offices, I think, in February or March of last year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So thank you very much as well. And are there any other questions? Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Time to go home.
Thanks. Yes, absolutely. Is there anyone else who is here to testify to this bill? To the resolution? Oh, yes. Okay. Actually, we have somebody who will call your name.
Barry Thompson and Stephanie Altieri. They're still here. I don't think they're here. After that, we have Tiffany Green, Maria Ortiz, and Roxana Gambino Schroeder.
Good afternoon, or almost good evening. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
patience.
Thank you very much,
Welcome.
Councilwoman. I'm Tiffany Green, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Safe Smith School Committee. And the reason why I stuck around, because I really feel it's important that we do put this on the record. My real concern is that I think I've heard a lot today, stories about the rental and evictions, but I think that we, and I'm saying to City Council, we need to take a real deeper look at the larger issue here and what is driving this increase in eviction and rentals, okay? If we don't look at the actual policies that are actually driving this, then this issue is going to continue to get worse. It's going to continue to increase in terms of homelessness and evictions. As you know, we're from Point Breeze, as you may or may not know, we're from Point Breeze, and Point Breeze at this point is really like ground zero as far as gentrification is concerned. But if we don't address the gentrification, then the other topics that come underneath that is just simply, it's like someone who smokes cigarettes. You tell them not to smoke, but then eventually when you get the lung cancer, then you know that that is a cause of that. That's a problem because of the smoking. I'm just using that as an example. The thing is, what I want to talk about is from the actual policy piece, which is, as you know, our school has been closed, and our Smith School has been closed. And 5 schools were sold to a private developer. This is a real concern because when you have schools being sold to a private developer, knowing that he stated he's going to put market rate condominiums into the school, it automatically turns a neighborhood upside down. The reason being because when the people hear this, they know that the rents will begin to increase in the neighborhood. This type of problem will begin to spread throughout the community. One school turned into market rate condominium can possibly raise the rents and push out hundreds of families within a 3 to 5 block radius. You say, why? Because what happens is that the landlords at that point see an opportunity. They say, okay, this is my opportunity to either get out the neighborhood and sell my property. So what happens at that point, we found that some of the landlords move into what we call tricky mode, which is they start to pull all kinds of tricks on the renters that are in the houses. They may do such as the things you heard today to get them to the point to possibly move out of the house. Many times they say, well, why should I get $700 when I can get $1,500 or $1,800 or $2,100? So this is the incentive to begin to push out the low and moderate income people in the area. So we have to be careful about the selling of our schools because one large school can gentrify 3 to 5, 6 block radius at that time. And that's why, one, I'm asking that City Council really have a sit down with the school district. There needs to be levels put in place before a school is sold to a private developer if you're really serious about stopping the evictions and the people being pushed out. We have blocks in Point Breeze. Now that I go back a year later, after I was out for a while sick and I went back, a lot of those people are gone. They were renters and they're not there anymore. We have new development there, and we have mainly a lot of white college kids in there, living in there, 3, 4, 5 at a time, and a lot of the long-term residents are gone. They're no longer there. So that's the issue. So I'm asking City Council to sit down with the school district and talk about the remaining schools. Now the developer is going to purchase 5 schools. One is Germantown, one is Smith, I forget the other 3. And these are 5 neighborhoods where majority are low and moderate income people. And they're going to be possibly pushed out due to high rents and high incomes. The other thing I want to talk about is that it's the policies, the zoning policy. Now, we put in the new zoning code. You have developers who are able to build by right, over the counter, and they only want to build one particular type of home. There's no diversity in the new construction or the new development. They're not interested in building affordable housing at all. So if they're not interested in building affordable housing, and we have 100 houses coming through, majority all are affordable, are high-end market rate, then that means the pool for renting apartments for low-income people is really starting to shrink. What is City Council willing to do about that? Where's the incentive for the developer to build affordable? You see, you have the 10-year tax abatement, but the reality is this tax abatement needs to be used as an incentive to provide for low and moderate income units as opposed to high end. Because if somebody can afford a $400,000 home, why do they need a 10-year tax abatement? You're losing out in the deal right now anyway. You're not really getting this money that you need.
In the end, they're going to move anyway. It's already been written. People are not buying these monstrosities like people think they are. In my block, it's 2-story. The house next to me, it's $600,000 for a 3-story. I'll call it a bunker because it looked like it when it was in old stage when they had the move.
I'm not finished.
I need you to state your name for the record.
Okay, I wasn't finished. Wait, I'm not finished. Let me finish.
No, but I still need Miss. I still need you to state your name.
Oh,
for the
my
record.
name is Marie Ortiz.
Okay.
Okay, let
Ms.
me
Green,
just
go
finish.
ahead.
Okay, so what I was saying, what was I saying? So we're saying that there needs to be incentives for affordable housing. If you don't put the incentives in, then you're going to continue to have this push for market rate high end, and then, as we stated, those existing landlords and that's sitting there are saying, hey, we want to get in on this run right now. Okay, so based on that and what we stated back in 2013 and 14 when we came down here and asked for your help, that's why we're hoping that this will be an open dialogue and that we may really be able to sit down and come to some serious solutions on that. Because at this particular point, Philadelphia not only has the highest poverty rate, but you also have now the second highest increase in rents in the country. There's a problem with this, and you need to look at this, that you're taking the lead on a lot of these issues in terms of the high poverty rate, in terms of rental increases. Then you need to look at what is the policies driving all of this to put you in this level. And one of it is the new zoning code. We need to re-look at that new zoning code and see what can be done, because when you remove variances out and let developers go over the counter and build, well, they're going to build to the maximum. Whereas you're not providing them, you're not putting any accountability in there. You're not saying to them, hey, look, if you get a city-owned property, then we need you to build affordable. Okay, you should not be selling city-owned properties, and I'm talking about in this whole city. You should not be selling city-owned properties and allowing developers to build market rate high end. Okay, but at the same time, these properties need to be affordable, and they need to be able to build affordable. These are some of the incentives you want to give to developers. We've had developers say, well, I don't mind building affordable, but hey, I can't afford it because my building expenses, the supplies, this and that. And so therefore, they say, well, I can't do it because of this or that. So I need to build market rate to gain back my, So I just want to finish up, because I'm saying what we're saying to you is based on our experience. If you really want to know for the rest of the city, then I think that you really should take a look at what has happened down in our area, and I think we can bring you serious solutions to what we think would not only
bring about keeping the eviction rates down, because, like we said, I just got a couple more things I want to say. The other issue we want to talk about is there needs to be some rent controls. I've not heard anything all day about rent control. New York has some rent control laws on the books. You have not talked about rent control, okay? And I can't specifically go into how you will do that, but it needs to be a dialogue and a conversation about rent controls, okay? How do you do that? As I stated, one is I think that tax abatement needs, and I'm not saying that you turn around and give somebody a 15, I don't think that's the answer, because as long as you keep that 10-year tax abatement in place, you're going to keep that push going, and it's becoming ruthless. It's very mean-spirited out there right now, and it's very hard to discuss and talk with these developers about building affordable, because they're like, look, we don't have to. You know, all we got to do is get over the counter. We only have to come in front of you. This is the attitude that we're getting. Okay, we don't even have to come in front of you. We can do it by right. We only have to discuss this with you. Okay, so it takes away from the whole process of negotiating with them. Well, how many affordable can you put in there? They don't want to put hardly any affordable. So we're being left with the government, but the government is drying up, because we have to realize we have a developer in the White House. So the thing about it is that at this particular point, you know, it's going to be very hard to really push affordable or try to keep the rents at a low rate. One other thing I want to talk about is the Section 8. Okay, we've talked to developers about maybe using Section 8. Okay, why don't you put a couple in your Section 8? They don't want to do Section 8. They're like, okay, well, we're saying if you're going to do new development, you can build to the Section 8 qualifications. They don't want to do that either. Okay, so it's this real high-end mentality. So our concern is at this point is that when the community comes out and vote no to a large market rate development, and then when we go down city council, when we go down to the planning commission and they say yes, and then we go to the ZBA and they say yes and pass it through and disregard hundreds of residents in the area, then you're having hearings like this saying, okay, well, why are people being evicted? Because the people came out and voted because they felt as though that particular development was going to jumpstart the high rents in the area. Okay, especially when the developer has stated he's not interested in putting any affordable housing in the project. So I think that city council needs to do some type of, I don't want to say soul searching, and look at the actual policies that is driving this high rent and these high evictions, and also try to put some funding towards community legal services, because in that properties are being destroyed, and Maria's going to talk about that. And so also we've had developers and landlords say, well, you know what, they raising the taxes on me. You know, you got the high end here, you got that, I got to pay my taxes, I got to raise my rents. Okay, and that they want to do that. They don't really want to do it, but they say, I have to do it. So we need to look at all that. And so, like I said, I can't go into all the details, but I'm hoping that maybe, I know, Councilwoman, I know you're very open and you're very sensitive to this matter, and we would love to sit down and talk more about this. And we hope that this will really take a serious look at the new development that's driving all of this high evictions and rentals.
Understood. Thank you very much for your testimony, and Marie, thank you for being patient and here. I know that it's late, and you should always feel like we're very open to continuing this discussion as well. So if you just wanted to summarize some of your points.
It's going to be fair.
Yeah.
I live in the gentrification area too. My concern is I'm a homeowner. I'm on the verge of losing my home because the developer ripped my roof. I got a hole in the basement, tore my fence out. I don't have no money. I got to retain a lawyer. The lawyer wants $6,000. That's a push between my medicine, my bills, and helping my grandson because he goes to Drexel and he's 15. My thing is long-term homeowner like myself and others that live in the community, property has been destroyed with these development coming in. Payments are caving in. We don't have the money to fix it, but in time there's going to be amenity where they're going to take my home because I'm not fixing these. You know, and I think that's unfair. You call license inspection, they say 10 days. They don't get back with you in 10 days. There need to be something that when these developers come in, you damage your home, you're going to pay for it. It's not done. I just want to see some continuity, not just for me, for all over the city, because it's happening all over the city. Because I took pictures, I go from one area to the other, I go from state to state, you know that, Ms. Gibb. I've been to Pittsburgh, been to Harrisburg, I've been here and there, and it's all over, and it's a crisis with the long-term homeowners. We need help, we need some support, as well as these newcomers coming in and doing what they want to do. That's all I'm asking. We need help.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your advocacy for the community and the work that you've been doing. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. Is there anyone else here to testify to the resolution? Great. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. If you could just state your name for the record.
My name is Roxana Gambino Schroeder. I'm the committee woman, Democrat for the 35th Ward, 1st Division.
Welcome. Thank you.
And the reason I had actually came today is to address the issue of these illegal evictions. Also, there are, in my specific area, I have many constituents that are being affected by 2 specific real estate companies that have been buying up a lot of the property. We had a lot of senior citizens in the area, and you know, the kids don't want to keep the houses, and you know, so they're buying these properties up for cheap. And the condition these properties are in, they don't do anything to them. You know what I mean? Like, there were older people that had the houses, so, you know, they go in, they buy them, and they just rent them out, and like windows are falling out of frames. For example, there's 3 houses on a 7200 block of Saul Street in Northeast Philadelphia. They're all owned by HK99 Realty. Now, these properties, they're actually not in my division, but it's the next division over from me. So the property was actually brought to my attention from a friend of mine that works for PGW. There's a family that's been renting this house for 8 years. They have 5 children. All children were, you know, conceived and born in this house. They had to turn the gas off to the property. The tenants had called PGW in regards to the smelling of gas. Well, upon inspection, the safety features that are on a house heater for the flume, for the amount of gas that keeps it running, were removed. So that the heater, instead of having to replace the heater, they took the safety features out so they could get a couple more years out of it. Well, the end result of which was the gas had to be shut off to the property. Upon further inspection, the whole basement is full of asbestos, which asbestos is fine because that's what was used years ago for insulation, but there's a specific way that it has to be removed in order to keep the air quality clean. Well, the owner of this property, I'm just sort of ripping it out. Now, 3 out of these 5 children are now having breathing problems. Nobody is helping these people. These are my constituents, they're in my area. Nobody is prosecuting the owners of these properties. There's no reason. Another person on that same exact block, which is owned by the same company, hasn't had a working stove in 3 years, and they rent. She has nowhere else to go. The third property, I guess it's the particular owner of it. HK99 is just the management for this specific owner. The law is that the owner of a property must retain keys in case of an emergency for gas, electric. Tenant comes home, landlord's sitting in her house, threatening to hurt her with bodily harm. She called the police. There is a police report to back that up, which is in the 2nd District. These are the practices that are going on in my area. I have senior citizens that are being illegally evicted. And what happens is the end of their lease comes up, and the law is within 30 days of the termination of a lease, either the landlord or the tenant, if they don't wish to continue, they don't, there's nowhere that it's written that you have to renew it. However, if you choose that you're not going to continue month to month or the terms of that lease, you must give 30 days notice by either party. Well, it's not happening. And what a lot of the owners are doing is they're filing for an eviction right before the end of the lease. So by the time they get on the docket, the lease is already up. And so this is the backdoor way of getting rid of senior citizens, because they're getting good prices for these properties. So they want these people out. And what I'm asking for is if somebody could please look into this and please help my people, because they really need help. And I mean, we've been very fortunate. Sherry Cohen actually represented a couple of my constituents in my area for free on these landlord-tenant issues, especially on the Saul Street properties, like I was telling you. And I mean, I'm aware of the programs that are out there. Unfortunately, the average bearer is not aware of the Tenant Union Rights Network, or now that City Council is willing to help fight for these tenants. And I would like to get it out there, maybe workshops in the neighborhood. I'm part of the Borough Home Civic Association. Councilman Taubenberger, I served with him 10 years on the Borough Home Civic Association. He also is from my area. He's native of my area. So, like I said, I'm here today just to make this a matter of public record that this is going on, and hopefully it'll be investigated and we can get some help. The one last issue I do have in regards to license and inspection is just as many of these slumlord properties that are going under the radar, whether it's by a license and inspection not knowing about it or it's not following through, nobody can point a finger at any just one agency. I know of another person who's a renter that has a swimming pool in their yard. Now, there's no water in the pool, of course, it's winter. Just received a $300 fine from license and inspection that says that anything that has 24 inches or more must be secured with a fence. Well, she put the pool up because she's getting a fence and she needed to know where the pool goes in order to be able to get the fence, because the house sits on a hill. There's no water in the swimming pool, so therefore it's not a danger. So how's license and inspection going to give you a $300 fine for a pool that hasn't happened yet? These are some of the questions that the people in my area have. And I'm hoping that somehow we can come to a resolution. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, especially as somebody who's coming in from your neighborhood representing the interests of your community. Thank you so much for coming here, for staying, and for giving us that insight. We're happy to have one of our staff people just make sure that we have your information so we can figure out what more we can do to assist.
Absolutely. So, and if there's anything that I can do to assist any of you any further, please feel free to contact me as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
I want to thank everybody again for their testimony today on this very important issue. Resolution 160988 will be recessed to the call of the chair, and this now concludes our hearing. Thank you, everybody.